This page then is the front cover of N64 Magazine, must be from August 97 by the looks of it, and £2.95 it was, blimey. They're really pushing Multi-Racing Championship, saying it's a world exclusive and the first rally game on the N64. Bit early to call it the best rally game ever, mind you, since it's supposed to be the first. Then there's a Banjo-Kazooie bit on the side, showing off that bear and bird duo. Looks very rare, doesn't it? Nice and colourful, platforming stuff, probably aiming for the younger crowd again. Up in the corner there's a Mario Kart Championship thing, asking, are you the best? Sounds like they're trying to get a bit of a tournament going, see who's the top racer. And down at the bottom it mentions Japanese and US news and reviews. Always good to see what's coming over from those territories, especially for those role-playing games we never seem to get over here. They've got little boxes for Go-Go, Troublemakers and Mother 3, so looks like they're covering those import bits as well, for the proper hardcore fans. Issue 5, so still quite new magazine at this point really. This page is page 3 of the N64 magazine from August 97, and it's all about Mario apparently turning up on Mars. Right at the top it's screaming, Mario found on Mars, like it's the biggest news ever. Apparently while the magazine team were meant to be writing about games like Multi-Racing Championship, NASA's Pathfinder probe was sending back the first decent pictures from Mars in ages. Someone in the office, probably Matza according to the text, noticed a face that looks a bit like Mario in the Martian hills. They've even circled it and put a dodgy little enhanced image to try and convince you. They reckon these hills are now called Twin Peaks because of it. They're promising to keep us updated on this Mario on Mars story, and then they rattle through some of the games they're covering this month, like Multi-Racing Championship, Blast Corps, Go-Go, Troublemakers and European N64 games. Sounds like a typical busy month for N64 owners back then. Down the side they've got 10 numbered points laying out what the magazine is all about. Standard magazine promises really, like they'll say the N64 is the best console, review all the games from everywhere, use skillful reviewers whatever that means, play games properly before reviewing, fill the magazine with tips, be independent and call out rubbish games, show off new game pictures, not waffle on, give gaming advice, and basically be the ultimate N64 mag every month. Bit of a bold claim, but that's magazines for you. And at the bottom, a picture of the trusty old N64 console itself with the question, can you say the same thing? Well, can you? Underneath, presumably implying the N64 is as good as their magazine? Cheeky. This page of the magazine shows us what's inside, doesn't it? First up, it's the N64 Arena section, where they've been reviewing and rating the latest games, kicking off on page 34. The big splash is for Blast Corps, that rare game where you smash things up. They reckon it's got everything you need to know ahead of its release later in August. Looks like a right laugh, all that destruction. Then over on the other side is the import arena, starting on page 48, which is always worth a look to see what's coming over from Japan and America. They've got a feature on Multi-Racing Championship, saying finally, the N64 has a proper racer, and it's a jolly good one. Well, we'll see about that. Moo. There's also Hexen, at page 56, more of your 3D monster shooting. Because who doesn't love a bit of that? Following that is Troublemakers on page 60, which they're calling an oddity, and say they've been looking forward to it. Sounds intriguing, doesn't it? Next up is Dark Rift, on page 66, a beat-em-up from the States that they're comparing to War Gods. Bit of a bold claim that, and rounding things off is Shadows of the Empire, on page 69, the Japanese version mind you, so plenty to get your teeth into in this issue then. This page then, right, looks like a contents page for N64 magazine, must be back from when the N64 was the hot new thing. At the top they're teasing what's in the mag, starting with games. GoldenEye 007, unbelievably good they reckon, yeah we all thought that back then didn't we? Then Banjo-Kazooie, Rare's big Christmas game they're calling it. Extreme G and F-Zero 64 are also mentioned, trying to be a bit clever with Great and Gnostic for Extreme G, and the old F is back for F-Zero. Bit cheesy, but it was the style back then. Shoo. There's a news center bit, and a coming soon section about E3, talking about loads of new N64 games from the show. Then the N64 how-to section, guides to ease you through life apparently. Looks like Tim Weaver is doing a piece about surviving E3, behind the scenes stuff. There's a competition about designing controller plugins, which sounds a bit niche even for us nerds. Mario Kart 64 gets a good showing, with cheat tips and a guide to finish off Mario 64 once and for all by ZY, or Zai, as they insist on saying it. On the right, Team 64 Inches introduces the reviewers. Jonathan Davies apparently hates cars but likes Blast Corps, which was a laugh, blowing stuff up. Will Overton spent ages on Go Troublemakers. Hold on, just Troublemakers they mean. James Ashton is on Multi-Racing Championship, and Tim Weaver again, also on Multi-Racing Championship. Seems like that was their game of the month. Paul Jarrold is reviewing Mario Kart 64, probably showing off. They also mention other writers, John Smith, Jonathan Nash, and our man Zy Nicholson, all contributing to reviews. Looks like they're having a Mario Kart 64 championship. For the best raceway time, you could win a cup. Europhiles is about their trips to America and Japan to quiz experts. Then the usual regulars at the bottom: subs, tips extra, Club 64, directory, back issues, and a tease for the next issue, N64 issue 6. August 1997, at the bottom, yeah, takes me back. This page in N64 Magazine, issue 5 it seems, is having a good old chinwag about GoldenEye 007. Right then, so back in 97, this was a big deal, wasn't it? They're saying at E3, it was the game that stood out, a potential show stealer, even for the N64. Bit of a surprise, as Rare kept it rather quiet, with just a small booth. Warranty 7. The article talks about how impressed they were playing it, describing some Russian nuclear base level. They mention the weapons feeling a little light, and the aiming system being a bit touchy. Holding the R button to aim more accurately could get you killed apparently. Which sounds about right. Controls were a bit clunky back then, weren't they? But they persevered, spending a good 3 hours on it on a Saturday, braving the Nintendo folks giving them the stink eye. Dedication, that's what it was. Apparently there's automatic targeting, but it's not as slick as Shadows of the Empire, which is a fair comparison for the time. They go on about being able to shoot out tires, and enemies reacting differently depending on where you shoot them, even being able to wound them in the shoulder. Fancy stuff back then. They also mention details like blood puffs from the silencer, and the sound of ricocheting bullets, all adding to the immersion, or so they say. There are a few screenshots dotted around the page. One shows a sniper rifle in action, zoomed in, very detailed for the time mind you. Another with a silencer on a pistol. They reckon it's good for sneaking about and not alerting all and sundry. Then there's a shot of a Russian base, and another of some chaps in green uniforms being sniped. They make a point about the sound of the sniper rifle being satisfying, which it probably was. Bit of a boomstick. Overall they seem pretty chuffed with GoldenEye, calling it a masterpiece in the making. A bit strong maybe, but we were easily impressed back then, weren't we? Good times. This page then, it's all about GoldenEye 007, isn't it? Ah, Mr. Bond. Very droll. Seems like it was a hit at E3, all this talk of 4 players battling it out as Bond villains. Trademark villains from past films they reckon. Oddjob, Boris and Trevlin, they list them. And they mention you can be a generic 06 chap too. Deathmatch style by the sounds of it, classic stuff. They're going on about the screen filling with blood. Bit much maybe, but hey, it's Bond. Ah, they're showing off the watch as the options screen, which was a pretty neat idea at the time I suppose. And they're banging on about the multiplayer action being splendid and the firing feeling outstanding. A bit enthusiastic, aren't we? Rumble pack weapons too apparently. Looks like some shots from the first level. Kill the guard, then onto the tower the caption says. Quite straightforward then. And they mention Turok as well, with disturbing cranial upsets on show. Always with the violence those games, weren't they? Says here GoldenEye is due out abroad in August and a UK release in November. Right then, something to look forward to later in the year. To be continued. Has many, in issue 7. Tara, for now. This page is all about Banjo-Kazooie, or as it was apparently known before, Dream. They're making a big deal of it being the next Donkey Kong Country for the N64, which is a bold claim, isn't it? Nintendo's Howard Lincoln was showing it off at E3, saying it's the first of Rare's 2 new 3D platformers, and reckons it's better than Conker's Quest even at this early stage. They had a massive setup to show it too, loads of screens, and a huge video wall. Sendai. The article mentions how good the characters are, full of personality and that, and reckons it's going to rival Mario, which is high praise indeed. Apparently there's flying bits which sound like they could be a laugh, and a big 3D world to explore, all very gorgeous to look at apparently, lovely as they put it. They only had 1 level playable at the show, but Rare are definitely onto something to compete with Mario. They're talking about running around a woodland home, collecting bits and pieces, and viewing the action from different angles like in Mario 64. Seems like they're really trying to push the boat out with this one. This page is all about Banjo-Kazooie. Right in the middle of the page in big letters, can't miss it. It's flagged as a game once known as Dream, so it sounds like this game has been in the works for a while, and folks have been waiting for it. The reviewer is talking about how it's hard not to see the similarities to Mario 64 at first glance, especially coming off the back of Rare's Blast Core, which was a bit of an oddball, but in a good way. They mention you play as Banjo the Bear with Kazooie the Bird in his backpack, who's handy for extra moves. Apparently there are loads of moves, though maybe only half were properly working at the show they saw it at. Each puzzle needs you to use one of these moves, so it's that kind of game then. Amy. It sounds like Kazooie is quite versatile. She can help Banjo climb steep hills, stick on his back, and even help him jump further by flapping her wings. They mention it feels a bit like Donkey Kong Country 64, DKC 64, which they call DKC 64 with a honey bear, so maybe a bit derivative. They're wondering what Rare are up to with Donkey Kong as well. Enemies are easy to spot apparently, which is good. There's talk of orange-throwing gorillas, giant termites, and this shaman character called Mumbo Jumbo, all sounding a bit like the old SNES trilogy, and the final game will have familiar-type locations across 16 levels. They reckon the levels are swamps, mountains, volcanoes, all looking good with 3D graphics as you'd expect. It's not groundbreaking, they say, but enjoyable, even in the single E3 level they played. But there are new ideas and features to keep people excited, even those big fans of Donkey Kong Country and GoldenEye. They mention at the time of writing there are only 2 or 3 N64 games really making use of the system. They think Rare are leading the pack, which is a fair shout. They saw lines of people watching the demo, and it all looks promising, even in this early version. They finish off saying if all goes well, we should get a review before Christmas, so still a bit of a wait then. There are some screenshots dotted around the page too. One shows Banjo in a kind of wooden level, another with Banjo and Kazooie facing some sort of spider thing, which they mention is because the shaman has turned Banjo into a spider. Nice. Another picture is of musical notes on a path, and they talk about collecting these. And then a final one of Banjo, in a dark jungle setting, with a weird purple creature in the background. All in all, it sounds like Banjo-Kazooie is shaping up nicely, even if it might be borrowing a few ideas here and there. Looking forward to seeing more of it closer to Christmas. This page then, is from the Planet 64 Feet section, a future look at Acclaim's upcoming racer, apparently called EXTR Wipeout. Blimey. Remember Acclaim? They churned out a fair few games back in the day, some good, some, well, less so. Anyway, this EXTR Wipeout looks like your typical futuristic racer for the N64, all twisty tracks and bright colors. The screenshots show these courses that are properly dark and then suddenly neon lit like a fairground ride gone a bit wrong. One bit mentions a 360-degree turn with a blinding green light. Sounds a bit much, doesn't it? Another bit talks about an alien ship being in the background, but reckons you'll be going so fast you'll miss it. Charming. They're comparing it to Turok on Wheels, which is a bit daft, but they mention missile explosions, so maybe there's some combat in it too. They reckon the tracks are varied, which is always a bonus, and they're making out like it's dead fast, saying it's face-contorting speed. Right then, we'll see about that. Looks alright for the time, I suppose. Typical N64 polygons. A bit blocky but colourful enough. Let's hope it's a bit more than just Wipeout with a different name. This page is from Planet 64 in N64 Magazine, seems to be a preview piece from the Future Look section, and it's all about Acclaim's Extreme G, splashed right across the page in big green letters. EMEG wiped out, it asks, a bit dramatic in it. They're previewing it from E3, back in '97, and they seem quite impressed actually. Apparently Extreme G was a bit of a surprise hit at E3. The reviewer reckons it's undeniably brilliant, which is high praise indeed. They were showing off just a third of the tracks, and only the hoverbikes were playable, with just standard lasers as weapons, but early signs were incredibly good. The main thing they bang on about is the speed. It's supposedly breathtaking, proper fast, like they had to design the tracks with walls you can ride up to recover if you lose control, which sounds a bit chaotic but may be fun. Tracks are described as roller coaster rides, with ups and downs and even speed jumps in a neon cityscape. Sounds like they're trying to capture that futuristic racing vibe like Wipeout on the PlayStation but for the N64. They do mention the basic premise is similar to Wipeout, but the game looks to be so much more. Confident words. They also mention the tracks will have road forks, 360-degree turns, corkscrews and jumps and twists, so it's not just flat tracks then. There's talk of 8 hoverbikes, and a veritable arsenal of weaponry to come, beyond the basic lasers shown at E3. Homing missiles and moon reversals are mentioned, which sounds suitably mental. 4-player mode wasn't ready at E3, but they say it's coming. Akuk. There are a couple of screenshots. One shows a view from behind a red and yellow hoverbike, racing along a futuristic blue and green track. Another one further up the page shows a green and purple bike on a brown track, with checkered blue edges. They look pretty nippy, very arcadey, that sort of thing. The sidecar attachments on the bikes, They call them uncouth looking but masterfully nasty in effect. The AI opponents are supposedly top-notch too. John Olshan from Probe reckons it's a new benchmark for racing games on the N64, bold claim that is. The reviewer seems to agree though, saying they'd have little choice but to agree, based on what they saw at E3. It finishes with "to be continued," and a promise of a full review soon. August 97 issue, so probably the next one then. This page is having a look at F-Zero, and it seems they reckon it's living up to the hype of the original on the SNES, or SNES as some still call it. The graphics, well, they're certainly 64-bit, showing off the Blue Falcon and other familiar crafts. They're saying the tracks are tougher than before, but maybe a bit less jumpy with the ramps, at least in the early levels. Apparently all the old vehicles are back, which is good news for fans. The reviewer seems to think Nintendo are focusing on speed and handling over fancy backgrounds, probably a wise move when you're going that fast anyway. They also mention that bumping into the other racers is a right pain if you're not a proper ace at the game. Sounds like it could be a decent racer for the N64 then. This page in N64 Magazine, right? It's all about F-Zero 64. Kicks off with a bit of a brain teaser, asking you to name the Nintendo fella who was big on the SNES with Mario and Mode 7, then vanished. Turns out it's Captain Falcon, the ace pilot from F-Zero. Makes you feel a bit old remembering those days, doesn't it? Anyway, the main meat of the page is a first look at F-Zero 64. They reckon that straight out of Japan, it might look a bit plain compared to Wipeout and even Extreme G on the N64. They do admit the tracks are still flat as a pancake like the old 16-bit game, which was getting on a bit even back then. But, once you see it moving, apparently at a silky smooth 60 frames per second, you remember F-Zero was always about the racing, not fancy graphics. They're saying it's pure, unadulterated racing, where you used every trick in the book, and any boost you could get, to shave off those hundredths of seconds. Sounds about right. They mention the power meter is back, and it might be for topping up. Tracks are floating high up, which they say makes for a bit of an unsettling race. They also make a point about the analog stick control being important, which is fair enough. That was a big selling point for the N64 controller at the time. Looks like there'll be loads of different tracks from Miyamoto's team at Nintendo who are apparently giving proper thought to using the analog stick and the time saving in the game. They expect different racing variety, and it sounds like it's mainly a single-player experience for now, which is a bit of a shame. Release-wise, it was due out in Japan in November, with a UK release date still to be confirmed. Typical. They're promising some hairy moments, and a new racing feel, thanks to the analog stick. There are a couple of screenshots showing the game in action, looking speedy enough. There's also a funny little box with a tip about using the Wild Goose machine and putting it in first gear to get up some steep bit of track. And right at the bottom it says "to be continued." So more F-Zero 64 news to come as they get their hands on it. August 1997, that was the time, wasn't it? Good times. This page is looking at the E3 show, back in 97 it was. Seems like a big deal was made of it back then, eh? Right, so it's all about the next generation of N64 games. They're calling it a gleeful E3 full. Bit much, but alright. Apparently the show in Atlanta was roasting hot, typical. They're talking about GoldenEye 007 and Banjo-Kazooie, which was called Dream back then. Seems like Rare were the darlings of the show, as usual. Banjo, even in an early form, sounded impressive, and GoldenEye was getting praise, though maybe the weapons weren't as big as Turok's. Size matters, eh? But it sounds like Bond was still top of the heap for shooters. Then there's Conker's Quest, described as a squirrel-based game, which is putting it mildly, isn't it? They say it's superbly drawn and lusciously animated, maybe a bit over the top, but alright. Nintendo of America's Howard Lincoln is quoted as saying it would reinvent video gaming or something. Bit strong, Howard, steady on. Also there's a scoop section about Hybrid Heaven from Konami. Apparently, it was secretly shown at E3, looking like a mix of RPG and Resident Evil, with a Metal Gear Solid vibe in the graphics. They reckon if the blurry video they saw is anything to go by, it could be a stunner. They're also mentioning Bomberman 64 standing out. Down the side there's the usual magazine blurb, issue 5. August 1997. Jonathan Davies is the editor, Will Overton the art editor, and so on. Price is £38.35 for a year in the UK, a bit steep. This issue was out on Wednesday the 25th of July, and the next one was due the next month. Right, that's about the gist of it. This page is a bit of a mixed bag, innit? Right at the top we've got Well We Never, where the magazine is acting all surprised they've got a chat room on the internet. Apparently corporate types set it up back in April. Bit behind the times, weren't they? Still, they're asking readers to pop along to their website at FutureNet, which is a proper blast from the past URL if ever I saw one. Beasters. Then there's Save a Fiver, talking about Nintendo of America dropping $10 off the price of N64 games. $5 or less here in the UK, they reckon. Always welcome, especially when you're forking out for those pricey N64 carts, though a $5 wasn't exactly going to break the bank, was it? Still, every little helps, especially if it covers the bus fare home and some chips. The N64 board is their notice board thingy. Looks like readers send in their drawings and bits and bobs. They've got some fan art up there, Bowser, Fox McCloud, Wave Race 64, bits and pieces. Someone sent a postcard from Naples, fancy that, and a mention of a Game Boy version of Star Wars, probably Shadows of the Empire if I remember rightly. Down the side it's all live from E3, follow the signs. Tim's been off to E3 to get the lowdown on all the new games. This whole issue is packed with E3 stuff apparently. Blimey, remember E3? Used to be a big deal back then. They're making a point of saying look out for the E3 logo throughout the magazine. Cheshire. And then there's a list called Games to Watch Out For. Let's Have a Butcher's, Banjo-Kazooie, Body Harvest, Bomberman 64, Clay Fighter 63 1/3, Conker's Quest. Blimey, that Conker was a long time coming, wasn't it? Dual Heroes, Duke Nukem 64, Extreme G, F-Zero 64, GoldenEye 007, Ken Griffey Baseball, Lamborghini 64 Mission, Impossible, Robotech, Crystal Dreams, Silicon Valley, Space Circus, Superman 64, Tetrasphere, Tonic Trouble, Top Gear Rally, WCW vs NWO, and Yoshi's Island 64. Cool, that's a right load of games they're banging on about. Some decent stuff in there, to be fair. Extreme G was meant to be a wipeout killer, wasn't it? GoldenEye and F-Zero 64 were definitely ones to watch. Bomberman 64, Lamborghini 64, and Dual Heroes took a bit of getting used to, according to the review bit on the left there. All in all, a good snapshot of what was looking tasty on the N64 at the time. This page then, is from an old issue of N64 Magazine. Issue 5 it says down there. Flipping through, it seems to be covering what's new and upcoming for the N64 back in '97. At the top there's a bit about Super Mario 64 too. Seems like wishful thinking really, but it's talking about Nintendo re-releasing Super Mario 64 and Wave Race 64 in Japan with a few tweaks like a ghost mode in Mario, bit like Mario Kart then. Apparently if you were nipping over to Japan you could pick them up. Lucky you. Then there's a section called Star Fox, typical magazine pun, that's saying Star Fox 64 is delayed until October. October? Felt like ages back then. They mention you could import it and use a Blaze adapter to play US or Japanese games on your UK machine. Blaze. They were always about, weren't they? Breju. Next up, Hudson Secret's a little nudge towards Bomberman 64. Reckon there might be a secret level if you used a Hudson controller. Never knew anyone who had one of those, but Bomberman was always a laugh. The main chunk of the page is called New Goods, and it's all about bits and bobs to go with your N64. Mostly Super Mario 64 snacked at actually. Exploding choc waffle cones, super surprise ice cream wafer cups, and an ice cream party pack. They sound alright I suppose, bit gimmicky though. Mario branding on everything back then. The review for the waffle cones says one of them was exploded in transit. Charming. They gave the cones 65%, the wafer cups 73%, and the party pack 70%. Not exactly glowing reviews, but it's ice cream snacks. What do you expect? Perfection. Then there's some proper stuff. SCART cable, memory card, and an RF unit. The SCART cable is from Blaze again, a tenner, and it's for getting a better picture than the standard RF lead. Sensible if you had a telly with a SCART socket. They give it 80%, which is decent. The 256K memory card, also Blaze, is for people nervous by capacious 1 megabit memory packs. Bit of a sarcastic jab there. It's smaller than the official one but cheaper. 85% for that, DC. Lastly, the RF unit, again Blaze, 15 quid. If your RF adapter was broken, or you had a European N64, this was your answer if your telly didn't have AV sockets. 70% for that. What? So yeah, typical magazine page really. Mix of game news and tap to buy. Highlighting the Mario snacks. Wonder if anyone actually bought them. Good times though, waiting for Star Fox 64 felt like forever back then. This page of the magazine kicks off with a bit of a surprise. Seems Mortal Kombat Trilogy actually sold out, even after they gave it a bit of a kicking last issue, go figure. Then there's a bit of worry about Mario Kart 64 carts. Apparently some folks are having trouble with them freezing, especially in multiplayer, which is a right pain if you're trying to get a proper race going. They're suggesting if you've got a dodgy one, to give Nintendo a ring to get it sorted. Turok is also mentioned as having a bug in the PAL version, freezing on level 8, Poor sod got all that way and then it conked out. Moving on to Retro World, Jason Moore is having a look at some old goodies. First up, Bomberman, and it's about collectibles, not the games themselves. Apparently, there were Bomberman figures made of hard plastic, and even a Bomberman alarm clock. Who'd have thought Bomberman would be collectible? There's a rating of 63% for these bits and bobs. Then it's on to Wario Land on the Virtual Boy. They're saying the worst thing about the Virtual Boy is you look a bit of a muppet playing it. Which is fair enough, those things were a bit odd looking, weren't they? But they reckon Wario Land itself is alright, a typical slice of Nintendo quality, giving it a decent 83%. Next, Solomon's Key on the NES. They call it a quest for perfect playability, which sounds a bit wanky. It's originally an arcade game, and the NES version is supposed to be just as good. Looks like a puzzle game. They reckon it's challenging and addictive, and worth a look if you're into that sort of thing. Another good rating of 83% here too. Lastly in Retro World is Greenhouse for the Game & Watch. Apparently it's unusual, because Mario isn't in it. Released way back in '82, double screen jobby, you're spraying flowers to keep hungry caterpillars and spiders off them. Sounds thrilling. They say it's fast and frantic, like other Game & Watch machines, and give it a 58%. Jason Moore's contact details are there, if you want to get in touch with his retro fanzine, Retro Games. This page from the mag is about the E3 show in America, which was always a big deal for seeing what games companies were cooking up. Tim from the magazine went over there to have a look. There's a section called Planet 64 Feet, which is always coming soon for something or other. But the main bit is about Conker's Quest. It was shown at E3, and it's from Rare, those clever chaps. It's a bit like their other games with animals, you know, like Banjo, though it looks single player only. Apparently Nintendo was saying they were taking more of a backseat in publishing it, letting Rare get on with it themselves a bit more. They reckon it was about 40% finished at E3, and even at that stage it sounds like it was pretty good. Howard Lincoln from Nintendo was even quoted saying it was reinventing the face of video gaming, which sounds a bit much, doesn't it? Still, they do say it's got that Rare touch, and even with Conker's fixed grin it will be good. There are some screenshots showing Conker and Berry, and it looks like your typical 3D platformer of the time, running around collecting things. The magazine seems to be giving it a good rating. The Q rating bit shows people queuing up and looking happy anyway. This page in N64 Mag, alright, let's have a butchers. We're kicking off with a game called Harvest Festival, or Body Harvest as it's actually known. Seems like DMA Design are on dev duties, with Nintendo publishing, so that's the Lemmings and Grand Theft Auto lot, having a crack at the N64. It's slated for winter '97 over here, autumn in the States. Apparently, it was just a video demo at some show, but even that was enough to wow people with screen-filling enemies and a proper Japanese vibe. They're saying Nintendo of Japan and DMA have been working their magic on it since Christmas. Sounds like it's been tweaked a fair bit. It's morphed from a simple shooter into an action RPG, whatever that means really, probably just shooting with a bit more story guff. The story is about bug-aid aliens invading different time periods, like Greece in 1916, and you've got to travel through time to sort them out. They're promising varied vehicles from biplanes to lorries. Visually it's looking much better now, aliens are more detailed, and the locations are more fleshed out. And thankfully, being a British developed game, they reckon the script won't be full of dodgy translations and silly place names for a change. They're teasing a bigger preview soon. Flicking down, there's a bit about Buggy Off, or Buggy Boogie as it's actually titled. Angel Studios and Nintendo are behind this one. Apparently it's been in development for ages, and there's rumors they binned it and started again. Judging by the screenshots from Japan, it's now looking like a souped N64 version of Stunt Race FX. Remember that SNES game? Details are thin on the ground, but they are hinting more info is coming soon, probably. Both games have a Q rating of N/A, so who knows when we'll actually see these in the shops. This is all under the Planet 64 Previews banner, N64 Magazine, August '97 issue it seems. This page in N64 Magazine, issue 5 it seems, is giving us a look at a couple of games coming to the N64. First up is Ken Griffey Baseball. Apparently Nintendo of America are saying it's going to be the very best in baseball simulation ever. Which is a bold claim, isn't it? They're banging on about reality system software for realistic ball movement and stadium sounds, which sounds alright I suppose. It's got real stadiums and players too, apparently including some team called the Arizona Diamondbacks, whoever they are. It's due in September, so not too far off. Mildura. Then we have Yoshi's Island 64. Looks like they showed some video footage at E3, but you couldn't actually play it, typical. They're saying it's going to be tougher than the old SNES game, which could be a good thing. More varied enemies, and Yoshi's got some new tricks like firing fireballs and eggshell. Buttocks? Right then. Visually it looks like it's had a bit of a spruce up, and they're hoping it'll be playable at the Japanese Shoshinkai show. Winter 97 is the expected release, so both are coming soonish. This page is all about a couple of upcoming games for the N64 back in 97, proper retro stuff. First up, there's Bomberman 64. Remember Bomberman? Yeah, still knocking about then, bless him. They reckon this one's gonna be a good un, back to its best. They're saying it's like Mario, camera trailing behind you, all in 3D. Sounds alright, doesn't it? Apparently the single player's where it's at, properly good fun, but the multiplayer is a bit less amazing. Though still a laugh with your mates apparently. There are some screenshots showing Bomberman getting blown up, poor sod, and running around in what looks like a garden, and on some railway tracks. They even put in a little joke about dying while playing GoldenEye at some game show, cheeky sods. Poor Then there's Silicon Valley, which looks a bit bonkers. It's got this orange fox character wearing boots and shades. Looking a bit smug if you ask me. They reckon it's impressive and nice to look at, and you play as different animals to solve puzzles. One screenshot shows this fox thing and some sheep in a pen. Apparently you might even get to drive a sheep with wheels. How weird is that? They're comparing it to Lemmings, saying it's really clever and original, high praise indeed. They seem pretty excited about it, to be fair. This page from N64 Magazine, issue 5, looks like it's all about the games that were shown at E3, must have been the big games coming up for the N64. Shakeka. At the top there's a section on Superman, called Super Trooper, looks like Titus are doing this one, and they're showing a screenshot of Superman and Lois Lane, a bit blocky, as you'd expect for the time. They reckon it's gonna be a final fight style, beat 'em up but with puzzles, which sounds a bit of an odd mix to be honest, but alright, we'll see. They only had a video demo apparently, and the reviewer seems a bit unsure, says it might be alright. Not exactly setting the world on fire, are they? Then there's a bit about Space Race for 98, and this is about Space Circus, made by Infogrames and Ocean. Seems like they're going for a proper 64-bit visual experience. The screenshots do look quite colourful and cartoony, with these weird green alien fellas. They're saying it's got a distinctly French style and feel, which is a bit of a strange comment, but fair enough. Maybe it's got that certain je ne sais quoi. Sounds like they think it's visually impressive but maybe a bit lacking in variety at this stage, but still promising, well, good they say, classic British understatement. Lastly there's Tetrisphere, under the headline, Tetris Culus. Nintendo are doing this one, and it's Tetris but with spheres instead of blocks, and in 3D. Screenshot looks a bit mental, loads of coloured balls everywhere. They're saying it's a 64-bit take on Tetris, which sounds fancy. Apparently it's a bit more complicated than normal Tetris, maybe a bit too much techno music, but they reckon it's enjoyable once you get the hang of it. No cues at E3 for it though, which is maybe telling. Enjoyable once you get the hang of it. So yeah, a page of upcoming N64 games from E3, Superman, Space Circus and Tetrisphere. All looking interesting, in their own ways. Early days for all of them it seems, and the magazine seems to be keeping expectations in check, which is probably fair enough. This page in N64 Magazine, August 97, is doing a bit of a preview special. Looks like they've been to some gaming show. First up is Dual Heroes from Hudson, who you know made Bomberman. It's a new fighter, beat-em-up type thing. Apparently it was playable at the show, and they reckon it's quite slick looking even though they only saw a few stages. They're banging on about a fancy 3D camera that moves around during the fight, and how each character has their own AI personality, which sounds a bit ambitious for the N64 days, doesn't it? They seemed quite impressed. Next up is Top Gear Rally. Now Top Gear, you knew what you were getting, always a decent racer back in the day. Kemco and BMG are doing this one. They're saying the controls are sensitive, which could be good or bad depending on how you handle it after a few pints, I suppose. They mention Lamborghini, so expect some fancy motors, and they're highlighting the detailed scenery, and the analog stick steering, which was becoming a thing then, wasn't it? Sounds like a solid racer. Then there's Duke Nukem 64. Duke? Yeah right, Duke it out it says. GT Interactive are on this one. It's a port of the PC game, obviously. They're not pulling any punches, saying the visuals were disappointing, a bit poorish even, but they say the gung-ho magic of the original is there, and that N64 rendering was popular at the time. They reckon it doesn't look as good as Turok or GoldenEye, which were setting the standard at the time, fair play, but because it's Duke Nukem it'll probably sell well anyway, all toilet humour and monster blasting, you know the drill. So yeah, a mixed bag then, some interesting games coming our way by the looks of it. This page from N64 Magazine issue 5, blimey, that takes me back. So we've got a look at Lamborghini challenging. For the N64, seems Titus is having a go at a racer on the console, based on their SNES game American Challenge. The reviewer reckons it's alright after a bit of persistence. Controls are a bit twitchy apparently. You jab the controls to steer, which sounds a bit odd, but they say it runs smoothly. Graphics are decent, AI is pitched right, and opponents aren't pushovers. They mention pit stops, which is a nice touch. Get your team to fix up the car quickly. Only worry is they say there might only be 4 tracks in the final version. Promising indeed, they say, with a Q rating of 4 little blokes in a queue, so not bad. Then we flip down the page and it's Clay Fighter 63 1/3, proper bonkers title that. Interplay had a cordoned off booth at E3, bit secretive weren't they? Sounds like they went to town with the claymation stuff, all very silly, but they reckon it's genuinely funny, and you'll be tittering away. They mention claytalities right, fatalities but with clay, very original. One turns your opponent into a cheesy disco dancer before they splat. They've got Bad Mr. Frosty, who chucks ice cream cones, and falling cows, naturally. They're bringing back old fighters like Houngan and Ichabod, and there's some new ones like Birth Squirm Slim and Sugarden, blimey. They mention breakthrough backgrounds like Mortal Kombat, where you can smash through roofs and walls, sounds a bit much. Apparently there were a few glitches, but overall it looked alright, a tooth-friendly grinful they say. Q rating is 4 little blokes again, seems about right. Both games are aiming for autumn and October 97 releases, so around the corner really, back then. Good times. This page then blimey takes me back. Right then we've got a couple of previews here for games coming to the N64. First up is Robotech, Crystal Dreams. Apparently Gamatech was showing this off, and it's been in development for ages, like 3 years they reckon. Seems like it had been scrapped and restarted at some point, which doesn't sound too promising. They're saying it's a spaceship combat game, based on that Japanese cartoon, Macross, which was pretty popular back then, though maybe more in the States. The reviewer doesn't sound overly impressed with the graphics, saying they need a bit of polish, and they're hinting at possible problems with the license, which is never a good sign, is it? It's down for November in the US, but no idea for us Brits yet. Tigu. Then underneath we've got Mission Impossible, based on that film with Tom Cruise. Ocean are doing this one. Again, it was meant to be out around November time, but sounds like it's been pushed back a bit to winter. They're making it clear it's not just a shooter, more about sneaking around and disguises, a bit like GoldenEye or even Turok in the way the characters look. Locations are from the film, like the Russian Embassy, CIA HQ, and even Liverpool Street Station. Fancy that? Sounds like they were still working on getting the gadgets and weapons sorted. They reckon N64 Magazine will have a proper playtest in a couple of months, so we'll see then if it's any good, won't we? Q rating is N/A for Mission Impossible, and E3 for Robotech. Not exactly setting the world on fire, are they? This page then is all about RPG news coming out of E3, though it sounds like the RPG showing wasn't exactly mind-blowing. Still, there's always something interesting bubbling up from Japan, isn't there? The big headline here is Legend of Zelda 64. Apparently it's coming along nicely, about 6,070% complete, and they're even hoping for a Japanese release before the year is out, though we'll see about that, won't we? They gotta see some video from Atlanta where Link's battling various creatures, and they're showing off the perspective switching between first and third person when you use the bow and arrow. Sounds a bit different for a Zelda game. Apparently there's even an overhead view when you go into certain rooms, which is a bit of a change. Miyamoto's name is all over it, doing his usual producer and director double act. They mention motion capture making Link's movements more realistic, which is the kind of thing they were pushing back then. There's little comments dotted around, one saying, "This is all looking brilliant but we want it now," which pretty much nails how everyone felt waiting for this game. Another one says, "Fantasy Resident Evil anyone?" which is a bit of a strange comparison if you ask me. And then, giant frog type things. Always a problem we find. Sounds about right for a Zelda game. Or we find. There are some screenshots too showing Link in what looks like a dungeon, fighting some sort of creature, and even getting attacked by chickens, which is a classic Zelda thing, isn't it? It's down as 128 meg, which was massive for a cartridge back then. December release for Japan, and TBA for the UK, naturally. New pics! In a little circle, because any glimpse of this game was a big deal at the time. So yeah, Zelda 64, the one everyone was waiting for back then. This page in N64 Magazine, right, takes a look at a few upcoming bits and bobs. There's a piece on Mother 3, or Earthbound 64 as they reckon it'll be called over here. Sounds like it's still a fair way off, but coming to the 64DD, which is Nintendo's disk drive add-on, they're saying it'll be a proper turn-based RPG, which is good to hear for those of us who like a bit of strategy. Then there's the Ask Fusoya column, bless him. Someone's asking if Squaresoft will ever make games for the N64, as they're a bit worried about the lack of RPGs. Fusoya, in his usual dramatic way, is reassuring people that Nintendo will bring the RPGs eventually, even if Square are being a bit stubborn and sticking to the PlayStation. He bangs on a bit about game sizes, saying story and characters are more important than massive graphics, which is a fair point, mind you. He mentions Tales of Phantasia on the SNES, Chrono Trigger, Final Fantasy VI, and even Zelda 3 on the SNES, to get his point across about smaller games being good. Boy. Down at the bottom in the update there are quick snippets about other games. Holy Magic Century that's getting picked up in the US. Pocket Monsters 64, which we now know as Pokemon Stadium I suppose, is coming, and apparently there's another Pocket Monsters RPG in the works too, surprising nobody really. Super Mario RPG 2 is mentioned, and it sounds like Miyamoto wants to do something a bit different with the 64DD for that one. And finally, Fire Emblem 64, a strategy RPG, is confirmed but not expected anytime soon over here. There's a screenshot of Mother 3 in battle, looks a bit like Earthbound in 3D, very colourful and cartoony, and another pic showing a standard RPG menu with options like fight and run, pretty standard stuff for the time. All in all, a typical update page for the mag, keeping us in the loop with what might be on the horizon. This page from the magazine is all about the E3 show, back when E3 was a proper event for us gamers. At the top it says live from E3, so you know it's fresh off the show floor. Then the main headline screams Hulk Hogan, which is a bit much, even for wrestling. It's about WCW versus NWO World Tour. Apparently, the N64 Magazine crew got to see real-life wrestlers, which they thought was a big deal. The game itself sounds alright, chunky graphics apparently, with loads of wrestlers, 60 of them they reckon, burying the memory of WWF games, which is a bit harsh. They mentioned multiplayer and Rumble Pack support, which was always a laugh back then, and creating your own belts, which sounds a bit daft but probably kept you busy. Sounds like a decent wrestling game for its time, though probably a bit rough around the edges compared to what we'd get later. Then there's a section on Grin and Tonic, which we now know as Tonic Trouble, from Ubisoft. It was behind closed doors, so a bit hush-hush. They saw a building-sized model of the main character, Edie the Martian, outside the show, typical E3 extravagance. Graphically enhanced screenshots, they say, and it was looking bleeding great, probably keeping it grounded like you do. They mention loads of moves for ED, like jumping, running, crawling, swimming, flying, pushing, pulling and swinging on ropes. Pretty standard platforming stuff really. They compare it to Rayman, which was a big deal on the PlayStation at the time, so that's a pretty big claim. Elsewhere on the page, under an ear to the E3 ground, they're chatting about other games at the show. Quake 64 was there, another PC port, looking smooth, with proper analog stick look up and down, which was still a novelty then. MK Mythologies was playable but didn't wow them, a bit of a mixed bag by the sounds of it. San Francisco Rush arcade conversion was there, played well apparently, a decent racer for the time. NBA Hangtime and Hardwood Heroes were mentioned from Midway, more basketball games. Mace, The Dark Age, another arcade fighter, sounded a bit rough visually. Konami were showing off Castlevania 64, Hybrid Heaven, and Nagano Winter Olympics, all sounding promising, especially for N64 owners. They also mentioned some Acclaim games like Turok, Extreme G Forsaken, Quarterback Club 98, and Ultra Soccer, plus Turok 2. Acclaim were really pushing the N64 back then. Gamatech had Wheel of Fortune and Jeopardy, kart-based versions, which is a bit of a weird flex for a game show, but each to their own. Kemco had Twisted Edge snowboarding, and they mentioned Cool Borders on PlayStation, proving snowboarding games could be good, so they were hoping Kemco could pull it off. Virtual On-Clone Legion 10 is mentioned, and EA were finally admitting their new FIFA game, FIFA Road to the World Cup, was going to be better than FIFA 64, which wasn't exactly setting the bar high. So, overall, sounds like a typical E3 preview, lots of games being shown off, some looking good, some maybe not so much. WCW and Tonic Trouble seem to be the main highlights on this page, with a good overview of other titles that were on display. Good times, simpler times in some ways. This page is a look at what's going on in Japan in the world of Nintendo 64. There's a piece about this game called Go Go! Troublemakers by Treasure, those guys who made Gunstar Heroes back on the Mega Drive, proper cult developers they were. Apparently the game is a bit bonkers, typical Japanese style, and one of the characters is even trying to become a pop star, which is a bit of a laugh. They reckon it might even top the pop charts, which seems a bit far-fetched for a video game tune, even back then. Then there's a piece about costume play, or cosplay as they call it. It's all about dressing up as your favorite game characters. Seems like it's getting pretty big in Japan, with loads of folks getting into it, cosplaying characters from games like Final Fantasy V-2 and Street Fighter. They mention this place called Disco Twin Star in Tokyo, where loads of cosplayers meet up. It was all a bit niche back then, dressing up in public, but seems like it was starting to take off even in Japan. This page here is a bit of a blast from the past, isn't it? On the left we have a bit about Nintendo and their upcoming N64 games. They're predicting big sales for Shadows of the Empire, that Star Wars game that was out on the N64. Remember all the hype around Star Wars back then? They were saying Nintendo thought they'd shift 180,000 copies straight away, and were hoping to do even better with 300,000. They're even asking if it will be as big as Mario. Cheeky. It mentions Yoda dolls and trading cards were all the rage. Seems like even back then, cosplay was kicking off, even over in the States. They called fans otaku apparently. Then next to that there's a little Nintendo shorts section talking about upcoming games. F-Zero 64 is mentioned, saying it's got even crazier courses than before, with loops and stuff that wasn't possible on the Super Famicom, which is what we called the SNES of course. There's also mention of Buggy Boogie, which is apparently a sequel to Wild Tracks where you can build your own car. Yoshi's Island 64 inches is in there too, based on the SNES game, keeping that 2.5D style, and they're wondering if Baby Yoshi will be in it. And finally, Legend of Zelda 64 inches is mentioned, but it sounds like it's been delayed because of cartridge issues. Oh, and they mention Mother 3, which is by that chap Shigesato Itoi, and it sounds a bit mysterious, something about a cave impossible to be lost. On the right side of the page it's an advert for T3 Magazine, Tomorrow's Technology Today. Seems to be their speed issue. It says first with the best new technology every month. They're promising to reveal crazy gizmos from Japan, delicious digital cameras, cool home cinema gear, and incredibly shiny hi-fi. There are little pictures of a Canon camera, some kind of fancy gizmo that's Pininfarina designed, and a cracking amp. They're also going on about Hypersonic Dream, with a supersonic plane going to Hawaii in 2 hours, and Formula One technology. Speed is splashed across the page in big letters, talking about planes, computers, motorbikes, all the fast stuff. They've got a special half-price offer to try it out, 3 issues for £4.50. Sounds like the usual mag spiel really, promising the latest and greatest tech. This page from N64 Magazine issue 5, blimey, takes me back. It's got an article called An Englishman in Tokyo, where Max Everingham, whoever he is exploring the streets of Tokyo. It kicks off with some news about N64 games coming out. Turok, Dinosaur Hunter and Shadows of the Empire, they were the big hitters back then, weren't they? We were all waiting ages for games like that in the UK. Apparently Star Fox 64 is keeping him sane while waiting. There's also a Learn Japanese bit, which is always a laugh. This one's teaching us how to write Nintendo and software, which they say is also used for computer game. Handy to know if you're trying to navigate a game shop in Tokyo, I suppose. Then it goes on about this Tamagotchi craze, remember those? Mental, wasn't it? Apparently they're releasing a version for the Game Boy. The article jokes about people queuing for ages to get a special Tamagotchi, only to find out it was a marketing stunt for an egg sandwich. Bit of a letdown that, eh? They even mention the South Korean government banning them because they thought it would retard the students' human development. Strong words. Anyway, the author's thinking of getting one, despite his wife possibly giving him earache. He's also looking forward to Multi-Racing Championship on the N64 and wonders if it'll be as popular as Mario Kart 64. Good times. Good times. This page from N64 Magazine, probably issue 5 by the looks of it, seems to be diving into a few games coming out on the grey cartridge machine. Right at the top in big orange letters it's shouting about Blast, and it sounds like they've got a 12-page spread on some Demolition Derby game from Nintendo. Bit early days for that kind of thing on the N64. Wasn't even out until the end of August according to them. Talk about jumping the gun. Below that there's Multi-Racing Championship. Apparently it's the N64's first rally game, and they seem rather chuffed about it, calling it brilliant a few times, bit over the top if you ask me, but hey ho. Then down at the bottom there's Hexen. That's one they're saying we should look forward to in the autumn, and the screenshot looks a bit moody and dark. Demons and all that, might be a bit of alright if you were into that sort of thing. And just tucked away there's an import section with the Japanese and US flags, probably sniffing around for games we can't get here easily yet. All in all, seems like a decent peek at what was coming up for the N64 back then. This page from N64 Magazine is all about how they score games and gives us a peek at a few titles they've been playing. Right at the top, they've got their guide to scoring, laying out how seriously they take reviewing N64 games. They reckon they play them properly, all the way through, before slapping a score on them, considering the amazing graphics and whatnot that the N64 is supposed to be capable of. They've got these score bands, like 85% and above is top tier. They even give out a Star Game award for those, saying they're classics that show off the N64. Then there's 84% to 70%, still good games, apparently, but not quite hitting the heights of Mario 64 and Mario Kart 64, which set the benchmark. 69% to 50% is kind of average, playable but nothing special. Below 50%? Well, they reckon they're warning you off, saying those games aren't much fun and a disservice to the N64. And anything below 20%, they're dreading even having to score that low. Imagine. They've given a score to Dark Rift, a beat-em-up, and it's only a 66%. Sounds like they're not convinced the N64 is the best for that type of game. Then Shadows of the Empire gets a 69%. They mention it's the Japanese version and they're curious about these tweaks Nintendo promised. There's a section on troublemakers, calling it the N64's weirdest game, but also one of its best, and it gets a 60%. Bit confusing that. They talk about how games often come out in Japan and America first, and they're tracking them and reviewing them as soon as they can, including the UK versions when they arrive. There's also a bit about playing import games, reminding us that back then if you wanted Japanese or American games, you had to go through specialist importers and you probably needed a Japanese or American console, or one of those modified UK ones, or a universal adapter. Remember those? Cost a fortune. Down the side they've got those categories explained, breaking down their scores into visuals, sounds, mastery, lifespan, and verdict. Just the usual things you'd expect in a game review really, asking if it looks good, sounds good, how well it uses the N64 hardware, and how long it'll keep you hooked. Solid, standard magazine review stuff from the looks of it. This page is giving us the lowdown on Blastcore. Sounds a bit dramatic, doesn't it? Unstable nuclear weapons lumbering unstoppably. They're really laying it on thick. Apparently the slightest bump and kaboom, Metropolis gone. Call for help. Call for the experts. Sounds like a right mess. But apparently, we're the Blastcore to sort it out. Looks like you get to drive these big orange machines. There's some chap in a lab coat too, bit of a boffin type. Northly. It's a rare Nintendo game, so you know it'll probably be alright. Says it's out late August or early September, 64 meg cartridge, and you'll need a controller pack backup. And blimey, £55. That's a fair chunk of change for a game back then. Still, if it's a good un, you'd probably consider it. Blastcore is the name. In case you missed it, they've written it big enough. This page is all about Blastcore, eh? Looks like a bit of a madcap game from Rare. They're calling it Arena Blastcore, which sounds a bit intense. It's all about this elite squad with, quote, awesome machines defending Earth and beyond. Right then, they've got these little round portraits of the machines, like character bios. There's J-Bomb, bit of a generic name. Thunderfist sounds a bit more punchy. Cyclone Suit, Ramdozer, and Sideswipe. Sideswipe looks a bit like a kid's toy, to be honest. The main picture is all explosions, and orange looks like they're driving these contraptions through a building or something. Typical Rare. Looks like a bit of chaotic fun, doesn't it? August 97. Blimey. N64 was still pretty new then, wasn't it? They were trying anything, weren't they, to get us to buy one. Still, Blastcore. Might be a laugh, might be pants, you never know with these things until you actually get your hands on it. This page from N64 Magazine, issue 5, page 38, it's the N64 Arena section. Blimey, look at this, it's all about Blastcore. Seems like they're showing off the game's action, you know, the one where you're in these vehicles smashing things up. Right at the top, there's a bloke saying, have no fear, fearless Blastcore team leader Pal Amber. We shall stop it. Then it jumps into the action. Looks like a truck carrying 2 unstable nuclear missiles is heading for that small village. Blimey, etc. So, classic save the world scenario, eh? And then it's, and look! Yes, look! Here we come, inside the metal suit of J-Bomb, to save the day. Bit dramatic, isn't it, you? Then it shows J-Bomb stomping all over some buildings with a WOOOOSH sound effect. The text says, Warrington Norsa has a bomb, 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 Warrington Norsa has a, Warrington Norsa has a, Warrington Norsa has a bomb. Very precise demolition, I suppose. Further down, they're talking about a train. And what's this on the other side of yon hill? A train? It surely is. And it carries a car too. One way or another, this train/car combination is sure to help us save the world. Right, because smashing stuff with a train is definitely the answer. They need to hurry up, jump out of J-Bomb, get in the train and drive it through the tunnel. Or there'll be hell to pay. Crikey. And finally, they're parking the train at the end of the line and race the car back to J-Bomb. Finishing off with our cunning wagon parking. Now to deal with that office complex. Office complex, you say? Sounds like a right old mess they're getting into. Blastcore, it was a decent game back then, all about destruction and making a right racket. Looking at these screenshots now, it's all a bit blocky. in it, but back in 97, this was the cutting edge, or so we thought. Good times, smashing stuff up. This page in the mag is having a look at Blastcore on the N64. It's showing a sort of comic strip of gameplay. Looks like you're tasked with blowing stuff up to clear a path for some nukes. Classic stuff really for back then. But then there's a twist. You've got to save a lorry from crashing, and then use a boat to bridge a river. Bit of a change of pace that. After that, it's back to blowing up path-intruding buildings, whatever they are, with some flair apparently, according to the reviewer. Cheeky. Seems like they got through one of the early missions alright, and they reckon there's over 55 more levels of this to come. Good grief, that's a lot of explosions for your money. The next page here, alright, it's a look at Blastcore, that rare game on the N64. Right then, welcome to my world. Bit dramatic, aren't we? Seems they are explaining how the game is structured. It's a flexible thing apparently, not just linear level after level. They mention revisiting levels and finding secrets, which, to be fair, back then was a good way to get your money's worth, wasn't it? They're going on about completing missions and pathways opening up. Standard stuff really, but they seem quite impressed with the world map, saying you can see how well you've done. Fancy, Warren done. There's a breakdown of the medals you can get in the game, like, level complete, for getting through it all in good time, fair enough. Black Blob, which is a bit of a strange name, is for levels you haven't even bothered with yet, or messed up. Bit harsh calling it a blob. Moon Medal is for finishing all the Earth levels, and getting access to Moon levels. Low Gravity, sounded a bit different at the time. Apparently there's another 4 planet things if you get gold medals everywhere. Sounds like a proper completionist challenge. Then there's Green Pathway, for opening up new paths by completing levels and activating satellites. Scientist means you've found all 6 hidden scientists, boffins they call them, and get to destroy missiles and move on to the final bit. There are different colored circles on the level select screen. Green for finding a satellite controller and getting a bonus level. Silver medal for not being brilliant at a bonus level. Red for gold standard level completion. And bronze for completing the bonus level in time but not amazingly. Loads of medals then, very organized. There are some screenshots, one of the game itself with some bulldozer type thing and some score, and little snaps of the level select screen changing as you progress, Simeon Acres and Shuttle Island, then Neptune, and a plastic toy scientist fella, a bit random, RE. Down at the bottom, there's a bit about control yourself, talking about the controls. Apparently despite loads of vehicles, the controls are straightforward. Stick steers, A is accelerate, B is brake, Z trigger gets you out of the vehicle, and shoulder buttons are for special abilities, and honking of course, who doesn't like a bit of honking? Simple enough, they reckon. Yeah, for the time, it probably was alright, not too complicated. This page right then, we've got a walkthrough here, looks like for Blastcore on the N64, it's titled Step by Step, pretty straightforward. Blimey, Blastcore, what a game that was. So it starts off with the first mission, telling you to use the ramdozer to flatten buildings for the missile truck classic stuff, making sure you don't crash naturally or kaboom. They reckon if you do it properly you get a gold medal and open up some new routes on the map, which is nice, Geringwaller. Then it says to go back and properly explore the level, like they always did back then, you know, milk it for all it's worth. Destroy all the buildings this time, not just the ones in the way. Apparently some of them have survivors, which were a bit weird if you ask me, but hey. 100% completion, in it. Then it's on to finding these radiation display units, RDU's little red lights they guide you apparently, but typical game design, they're hidden in obscure places. Another gold medal for that, Kugurunchu. And even after all that, they say there are still secrets to find, like a car on the train. Drive the train to the platform and nick the car cheeky. Once you've done all this level proper completion stuff, you can move on. They mention you get the ramdozer and cyclone suit to help you out in later bits, for clearing paths, buildings, survivors, and RDUs. Then it's on to activating satellites. 2 uplinks in this mission apparently give you bonus levels. Gold medals are the name of the game, they reckon they teach you skills, bit much, but yeah. Getting good times was always a badge of honor. Repeat all this on the other missions, making sure you search properly. Iba. Next, find scientists, each one gives you a clue to the next, sounds like a right faff, but they say it helps you find all 6 quicker. And then, saving the space shuttle is apparently important, careless not to they say, bit dramatic. If you save it, you go to the moon. New gravity, a pleasing twist, charming. Right, gold medals on every level, leave no stone unturned, all that jazz. Then you get to beat the outer planets, after the moon Mercury, Venus, Mars and Neptune, all Backlash, Ramdozer and Skyfall, or just Backlash levels. Enjoy them they say, as if we had a choice. Warrington. And finally, super gold scores when you come back from Neptune, all your gold medals are wiped, and the difficulty gets cranked up. They reckon only then you are a true blastcore master. Bit hardcore that, wasn't it? Blastcore was good though, I'll give them that. This page in N64 Magazine, right, it's all about Metal Machine. Seems like they're showing off some of the vehicles you can drive in it. First up is the J-Bomb, which sounds like a right laugh if you want maximum destruction. They call its mayhem factor inordinate. Then there's the Thunderfist, which is extreme mayhem. Apparently rolls into buildings and pounds stuff with its arm. Sounds a bit much, doesn't it? Next is the Ballista, serious mayhem factor. Some kind of rocket bike thing to level targets. Could be alright. Then we've got the Ramdozer, mayhem high. Always reliable they reckon, good for pushing boxes of TNT. Skyfall is pleasing mayhem factor, dinky looking buggy, but apparently can cause chaos with a downhill supercharge. Lastly there's the Backlash, startling mayhem, a tough truck to control, needs to be swung around backwards to do damage, sounds a bit fiddly to be honest, but they say it's impressive on low gravity planets. And finally, the Cyclone Suit, significant mayhem, unpredictable, and flips all over the place, sending structures crashing down. So yeah, Metal Machine. Looks like a bit of a laugh if you're into causing a bit of digital carnage, doesn't it? Mayhem factor this, mayhem factor that. Bit over the top with the hype maybe, but back then you'd probably be well up for giving it a go. This page in the mag, yeah, it's all about mayhem. Bit of a shouty title, in it, and it's focusing on blastcore. They're trying to say it's more than just blowing stuff up, which, to be fair, it kind of was. They go on about puzzles and that, showing some screenshots of block puzzles and crane action. Sounds a bit more like hard work than just causing a ruckus, doesn't it? They're banging on about the vehicles too, Sideswipe with its extending platforms, and the A-Team van gets a mention, always a crowd pleaser that one. Apparently even the regular cars get a bit of a thrashing. This is from the N64 Arena section, August 97 edition, issue 43 apparently. This page, alright, let's have a look then. It's a bit of a feature called Nice and Easy Does It, talking about blastcore. Ah, blastcore on the N64, yeah, I remember that one. Warrant. So they're breaking down the game's difficulty levels. Starting with easy, they're saying the first few levels are a doddle, proper introductory stuff. Controlling the vehicles like the Ramdozer is supposed to be simple enough, even for complete newbies. Pick up and play, they reckon. Then we move on to quite easy, and apparently there are hidden vehicles scattered about, which is a bit of fun for completists, or just messing around. And the puzzles are supposed to be not too taxing. A bit easy really. Cheeky sods. Quite hard section is about the Ramdozer and trains. Driving that bulldozer near a train, yeah, that could get a bit hairy. They mention collisions sending you flying about, making it tricky to load stuff onto train carriages, and finding scientists to defuse missiles, that's in there too. They hint at clues, so not completely impossible then. Finally, hard mode. Activating a satellite in Echo Marches, sounds like a proper hidden objective, bit more involved, running around in subways, and swapping vehicles to find some transmitter. And then Oyster Harbour, saving a carrier. They're calling that the most complex mission, loads of tasks against the clock. Sounds like a right challenge, they say, very unforgiving time limit. Right then, blastcore. Not just smashing buildings then, eh? Bit more to it than that apparently. This page from the mag is having a chat about blastcore on the N64, you remember that one? They're going on about how it's designed so anyone can have a go, whether you're a complete novice or think you're some kind of gaming guru, bifiken. Starting off with the easy levels, they mention freeing survivors, which was a bit of an odd mechanic really, weren't they just hiding in buildings waiting to be rescued? Still, they say it's hardly an extra challenge because you're blowing everything up anyway. They reckon the Ramdozer and J-Bomb are proper fun, especially the J-Bomb for causing maximum carnage. Which, yeah, fair enough, that was a laugh. Moving on to quite easy, it's the Cyclone Suit and Ballista bike. Apparently they're a bit unpredictable to control, which is probably putting it mildly. They were a bit all over the place, weren't they? Then we're into quite hard territory, with saving the space shuttle. They call it a surprise twist, saving the shuttle after all the nukes and stuff. Bit dramatic for blastcore, wasn't it? It was just another level really, but they seemed impressed. Finally, hard levels, which they say starts with mastering the Backlash truck. Trying to power slide that thing about was just asking for trouble, wasn't it? And then the Diamond Sands mission, which they're calling the most annoying level in the game, saying everyone agreed on that. Straddling buildings on a railway line, sounds like a right pain to be honest. Frustratingly hard they reckon. So yeah, sounds about right for blastcore. Some bits were a doddle, some bits were a right proper challenge. Decent game for its time though, wasn't it? This page from N64 Magazine, issue 5 by the looks of it, is all about blastcore, that rare game. right on the arena section, as you can see at the top there. It's got a few screenshots showing the game off, you know, the usual chunky N64 graphics of the time, with explosions and vehicles smashing through buildings. They're banging on about how great the explosions are, calling them corny searing, bit much isn't it? But yeah, they looked alright for the time I suppose, all blurry and massive. They start off talking about the core gameplay, saying it's like knocking down sandcastles, but more enjoyable because you're causing proper destruction. Sounds about right, that was the appeal of Blast Corps, wasn't it? Smashing stuff up. They mentioned spending ages building things in games and then destroying them here. Bit of a weird comparison, but I get what they mean. There's a boost box, giving a tip for getting a turbo start, comparing it to Mario Kart, which was obviously the big game on the N64 at the time. Clever little tip for shaving seconds off your times, in the bonus levels. Then there's a section called Breakfast, which is a bit of a strange name for a game section, even for N64 Magazine. They say it's got all the answers to gaming questions and is packed with action. Bit over the top, they mention demolition heavy machinery, fast cars and explosions, and how you'll be playing for ages. They're saying it's a mission-based game, and you get new missions as you go, and bonus levels for doing well. Adrenaline is the next bit, saying it's a flexible and compelling setup with varied challenges. One level might be a smashathon, just bulldozing through everything, and another might be more complex, involving multiple vehicles and explosive crates. They're keen on pointing out that even the complicated bits are still full in action, thanks to the missiles constantly heading towards you. They reckon Blast Corps is a proper mission-based game, and that you can revisit areas to explore and find secrets later. They are laying it on thick a bit, saying it's impeccably clever and alluring, and that we'll all hold our copy of Blast Corps in high esteem. Bit much, but yeah, it was a decent game, good fun for a bit of mindless destruction on the N64. Classic rare, really. This page has a bit of a moan about pale release dates. Typical back then, eh? Seems like they got the American version of Blast Corps in for review because the UK PAL version was delayed until late August or September of '97. They're a bit miffed they can't play the proper PAL version yet to see if the conversion is up to snuff, but they've gone ahead with the review anyway using the US copy. .dt. It's all about Blast Corps really. Going by the massive headline, they reckon it's from Rare, which we all knew meant it should be something special after Killer Instinct Gold on the same console. The review itself, well, they're pretty chuffed with it, saying it's a proper full-screen affair, unlike some of those dodgy conversions we've seen. Looking at the bits and bobs they've picked out, Thunderbirds, acquaintances and whatnot, it sounds like there's a lot to get your teeth into. Apparently at first you just smash through levels, but then the game expects you to be a completionist, getting gold medals, and destroying every single building. Sounds like a right challenge for the hardcore types. Visually, they've given it an 8, saying the explosions are the best they've seen in a game, and the sounds get a 9. Crash! Bang! Wallop! Proper sound effects then. Mastery gets a 9 too, something about harnessing the N64 magic, which is a bit flowery, but you get the idea. Lifespan is only a 6 though, maybe it gets a bit repetitive once you've mastered it, or perhaps it's just a bit short. Overall verdict is 88%, they call it a blockbusting treat, and just great. So yeah, seems like Blast Corps was shaping up to be a good even if we had to wait a bit longer for the PAL version over here. Looking at the screenshots, you've got your typical isometric view, loads of explosions and these futuristic vehicles smashing stuff up. Standard rare quality then, hopefully. This page from the mag seems to be diving into the world of import games, specifically for the N64. It's called Import Arena, and features the Japanese and American flags at the top, making it pretty clear what's going on. The text boxes explain that from this point onwards, any game reviewed in N64 Magazine that's not out in the UK, but is available as an import from Japan or the US will be covered. They're saying they'll be doing more on games released in the UK, in future issues too. Kesed. The main image is clearly from a racing game, showing a car with Datsun on the side, and a big number 3 on the bonnet. There's also a little inset box with screenshots from the game. The text mentions they've broken the lap record fairly comprehensively in this multi-champ game. Sounds like they were having a bit of fun with that one. Warranted. So it's all about giving us a peek at the games we couldn't just pop down to Electronics Boutique to buy, back when you had to be a bit more resourceful if you wanted to play the latest stuff from overseas. Import gaming, eh? Those were the days, sometimes hit and miss, but always exciting to see what gems you could find that the rest of the UK hadn't got their hands on yet. This page has got an Import Arena section, focusing on Multi-Racing Championship for the N64. Thank goodness it says here, because apparently it's the N64's first rally game, and it's a blinder, which is good news, because they were a bit down on some of the other third-party games so far on the N64. They mention earlier titles being a mixed bag, calling out Superb Turok and ISS 64, but then also slating Doom 64, Mortal Kombat Trilogy, FIFA 64, and Pilot Wings 64, saying NO to them all pretty much. Ouch. Bit harsh, but fair enough I suppose. Some of those were a bit rough around the edges. KD. Anyway, back to Multi-Racing Championship. Looks like they're quite impressed. They talk about it being interesting to see if Genki can make the N64's first driving game the best. There are screenshots showing some in-game action, looks like snow and different terrains, and it mentions variety of driving surfaces. There's a little bit of a techie note about red arrows, showing how to throw the analog stick to one side and pray. Sounds a bit dodgy but maybe fun. At the bottom it's got the import info. It's out now in Japan, coming in September to the UK, costing about 40 quid, which is a fair bit of cash back then. Uses 1 to 2 players, needs 16 meg of memory, and is on cartridge with on-cartridge backup. So yeah, Multi-Racing Championship, first rally game for the N64, and sounds like it might be a decent one to look out for. Finally something good after a few stinkers, eh? This page dives into Multi-Racing Championship on the N64, and right from the start the reviewer's having a bit of a giggle at the name, Ordnance Survey, suggesting it's a bit of an odd choice, wondering if they couldn't come up with anything better. But the multi-part actually refers to the multiple routes within the tracks, a neat idea where you get to choose different paths each lap, which sounds pretty clever. They're saying on average lap, you'll have to make decisions on which way to go, with 2 route options on track 1, 2 on track 2, and 5 on track 3, making each race a bit different. It sounds like they're aiming for variety by mixing up on and off-road sections in those routes, which, back then, was a good way to spice things up a bit. Then they get into the cars, asking if garage rhymes with carriage or mirage, which is a bit of wordplay to introduce the vehicle selection. Apparently there are 8 cars in total, initially, which is a decent number for the time. They break them down into 2 groups. 4 are your common garden touring car style racers, front or rear wheel drive, good for the tarmac. And then the other 4 are the off-roaders, like jeeps and bouncy sand buggies, for when you fancy getting a bit muddy. They're saying the on-road cars might struggle off-road, which is fair enough. The Michelin Man section is all about the car customization, which they seem quite impressed with. You can fiddle with your car settings in your team garage, like tyre choice for different weather or track surfaces, messing about with suspension, gear ratios to tweak top speed and traction, and even adjusting your rear spoiler for downforce. They reckon this customization actually works, especially for the straight racing cars, making them easier to handle. It's illustrated with screenshots showing course selection and in-game racing, and a bit of the machine setting screen. Looking at the tables you can see it's got a 30 FPS frame rate, top speed of 250 km per hour, full screen display, cartridge size of 96 M, internal save for times and secret cars, and memory pack support for ghost recordings and car setups. Specs-wise, it's got 3 tracks, 2 players max, in-car and behind-car views, 4 play modes, horizontal split screen, 9 opponent cars in single-player, none in 2-player, 4 on-road car options, 4 off-road, 2 hidden cars, no hidden tracks, and mirror mode available after completion. Controls are joystick, A for accelerate, B for brake, and no handbrake. It's got co-pilot speech, adjustable stereo, and background music sound options. Cost-wise, the cartridge was about £40 back then, and optional extras were things like extra pads, memory packs, and rumble packs, which were all the rage at the time. It was released in Japan in July and in the UK in September by Ocean, so pretty quick turnaround from Japan to here. This page from the August 97 issue of N64 Magazine is having a gander at Multi-Racing Championship on the N64. Seems to be a track guide for the seaside course, which they've labelled as Easy Cheeky. Probably not that easy for most of us back then. There's a track map showing the layout, and then screenshots of the game itself showing bits of the track like tunnels and off-road sections. They're giving a few tips on how to get a better time, pointing out shortcuts, like a bumpy back alley one, that they reckon saves you nearly 10 seconds. They even have a comment about the spectators being massive, which they really are in those old games, aren't they? And they're poking fun at someone called Tim for being in last place, bless him. Brings back memories of reading these mags for tips and tricks, doesn't it? This page is having a look at the mountain track in Multi-Racing Championship on the N64. Right, track 2, mountain, difficulty level medium according to them. You've got the track layout laid out, like one of those board games, showing the main route and the supposed shortcuts. They've stuck in a load of little screen grabs, showing bits of the game, with these tip bubbles. Apparently, the cars handle alright in the snow, superbly even, though a bit skiddy naturally. And there's a wonderfully tricky snowy shortcut, bit of hyperbole there I reckon. Someone's decided one car is obviously the best, bit definitive isn't it? Oh, and the rumble pack is bootiful on bumps for another shortcut. Bootiful? Seriously? They're also on about getting into the top 10, 9th and 8th place mentioned, and a bit lost with all the routes on the track. So, it's a track guide. aimed at helping you navigate the mountain course, if you can stomach the slightly over-enthusiastic language. Remember rumble packs? Dusty things now, probably. This page from the magazine is all about the import scene, and this time it's having a look at Multi-Racing Championship on the N64. It seems to be one of those slightly overlooked races, not exactly Mario Kart, but maybe worth a punt if you're after something different. They're taking us through the downtown track, which they say is the hardest and strangest of the lot. Apparently, it's set in some odd European-style villages with underground tunnels. Sounds a bit bonkers, doesn't it? The page is showing off a bunch of shortcuts and secrets dotted around the track. There's one where you go through a tunnel, another through a fence into a waterfall, sneaky stuff as they say. And they mention taking the ocean truck for a spin because it can handle the rough stuff better than the rally cars, but apparently it's a bit slow. Fair enough. It's all laid out with screenshots showing where these shortcuts are, and little tips about how to find them. Seems quite helpful, if you were actually stuck on this track back in the day, though I reckon most of us were probably more interested in blasting around Rainbow Road on Mario Kart 64 if we're honest. Still, Multi-Racing Championship looks like it could be a bit of a laugh, especially with those huge spectators they mention. Mad. This page in N64 Magazine, issue 5, is having a look at Multi-Racing Championship. It seems they reckon it's a decent game, filling a gap on the N64, and showing up Cruisin' USA, which they weren't too keen on, saying Cruisin' USA really went wrong. Bit harsh, maybe. They're going on about the analog stick control being great in Multi-Racing Championship, saying it's more precise than just digital taps for steering. They mention how gentle movements on the stick make the car subtly swerve, and you can even cut corners without losing too much speed if you're handy with the controls. Then again, they also say for sharp corners you need to brake and heave hard on the stick, which sounds a bit dramatic. Apparently you can do impressive spot earning and all that. They seem quite impressed with the handling overall, and say it's satisfying to drive a clean lap. The review mentions there are 4 modes: V's Race, Time Trial, Free Run, and Championship mode. Championship is the main one, racing on 3 tracks, and if you win, you get a gold cup. Winning all championships unlocks Match mode, where you race against hidden cars. Beating those unlocks the Pit Garage in Time Trial and Mirror Tracks in Match mode. So, plenty to unlock then. Checks. There's a bit about a close road option hidden away in the menus, which lets you customize the tracks by blocking off routes. They reckon this is a good feature, making the game last longer, as you can mix up on and off-road sections. They moan a bit about not being able to save different car setups with best times, saying it's a missed opportunity on the pre-production version they played. Still, they reckon the close road thing is good. Looking at the screenshots, there's one showing the results screen saying congratulations after winning, and another showing a race in progress on a track called Downtown. Another one shows the course select screen with mountain course highlighted, and another with a car flying through the air with replay on screen. Typical racing game stuff really. There's also a little tip box saying if you buy a car, don't get it in yellowy green because people will laugh. Cheeky. This page in N64 Magazine, right, it's taking a look at Multi-Racing Championship from Japan. Seems like it's called Import Arena for these types of games. They're on about the 2-player mode, calling it Battle. It's split screen as you'd expect, though Genki, who made it, have stuck in some thick borders at the sides, apparently to give you a better view, which is a bit of a funny excuse really, probably just to make it run smoother. They reckon even with that, it's still pretty nippy and doesn't feel like it's slowing down. There's screenshots showing the game in action, 2 cars battling it out, classic split screen stuff. They've got little speech bubbles and arrows pointing at things in the screenshots, like one saying, "See? First and second place. We're great. What was that? Bit cheesy that." Another one mentions player 1 slipping into second place, and another about using a shortcut. It's all very dramatic, isn't it? They're saying the 2 players alright, good for a laugh, but maybe not as much fun as Mario Kart 64. Especially because there's no computer players in 2-player mode. But they still think it adds to the game. They mention Rev Limit and Top Gear Rally as other racing games to compare it to. Down the side, in yellow boxes, they've broken it down into categories. Visuals, they say, are fast and smooth, good sense of speed, but the resolution is a bit pants compared to Mario Kart. Sounds? Oh dear. Engines sound like bees apparently, not great then. Copilot speech though, which was probably a novelty back then. Mastery is about the N64 controller, and it looking similar to PlayStation racers, always had to get a dig in at the PlayStation, didn't they? Lifespan they reckon is decent, because of the 2-player and ghost modes. The verdict gives it 81%. They say it's nearly brilliant but let down by the rubbish computer opponents being too easy, and the graphics being a bit blurry. But still lots of fun apparently. Overall sounds like it's alright, nothing amazing but decent enough, especially if you've got a mate to play with. They mention they'll review the UK version later in the year when it's out in September. Wonder if that made any difference. And it says to be continued at the end. Dramatic stuff. This page of N64 Magazine, issue 5 it seems, is having a look at Hexen. Remember that? It's got a big old title splashed across the middle. Hexen, in massive letters, can't miss it. Apparently they're playing through the first stage of the game. By the hand through stage 1 it says. They're showing off Pariah the Cleric, going through Winnowing Hall, and mentioning that stage 1 is a bit on the short side compared to the rest of Hexen. And also, in classic 90s style, there's a comment about not having decent weapons yet. Charming. Chuckay. There are a few screenshots showing typical Hexen gameplay. One shows the start of the game in a windswept courtyard. Bit dramatic. Another one has Pariah being attacked by a couple of those two-headed Etin blokes. They were a pain, weren't they? Then there's stained glass windows that apparently give you health. Life-giving test tubes. Sounds about right for a fantasy shooter. And finally, a door opening with the jump button. Revolutionary stuff back then. Warrington do. The reviewers even put in some little speech bubbles in the screenshots. One of them is moaning about being attacked by too many Etin, and saying he should have attacked from the stairs. Bit late now, mate. The other one is joking about the monster wanting to be friends. Unlikely though, yeah, very TKNA. Down at the bottom there's a little box with game info. It says Hexen is from Midway, out now, 64 meg, and it's for 1 to 4 players. Coming out in autumn in the UK, and it needs the controller pack for backup. Price is $80, about £50 quid they reckon. Expensive times for games back then, eh? Still, Hexen, yeah, it was alright. A bit like Doom but with swords and magic. Good for its time, I suppose. The next page talks about Hexen, which was a bit of a departure from your usual first-person shooters back then. Raven Software, who made it, were trying to do something different to Doom, and fair play, they came up with a few good ideas. The article highlights 3 things that made Hexen stand out. First up is having different characters. Instead of just being some generic bloke, you could pick a warrior, cleric, or mage, each with their own strengths and weaknesses. The warrior was your closer-range bruiser, the mage could zap enemies from afar, and the cleric was somewhere in the middle. It did make you think a bit more about your playstyle. Secondly, it's about the weapons. In Doom, you pretty much just blasted everything with whatever you had. Hexen was a bit stingier with ammo, but it had more interesting weapons that were powered by mana. Blue mana and green mana, I remember those. There's talk of ghost-firing crucifixes and flaming swords, which were pretty cool for the time. Thirdly, they mention the medieval setting. Most shooters were all futuristic ray guns and metal corridors. Hexen went for a more fantasy vibe with dragons, stone walls, and swamps. It did feel a bit different, even if it was still fundamentally running around and shooting monsters. Then there are some little captions dotted around with screenshots. One points out a caged flame, another about a hidden switch and Etins, which are those two-headed ogre things. Another mentions green gas flasks which you could use to create monster-unfriendly clouds, and finally smashing a window to find a secret passage. Just your typical game secrets and tips, really. All in all, Hexen was a decent game that tried to mix things up a bit in the shooter genre. This page in N64 Magazine, it's the Import Arena section, always worth a look to see what's floating over from the States or Japan. This time it's all about Hexen, it seems. They've got a load of screenshots here. Looks like a bit of a walkthrough showing you how to get through some of the tricky bits. Pulling switches and finding keys, classic stuff. Oh, and watch out for Etins, naturally. All about cheat codes, God mode and all that rubbish. They say it ruins the game, and well, they're probably not wrong, are they? But still, good to know they're there, just in case you get completely stuck. The cheats are things like God mode, visit, butcher, collect all things, all keys, all artifacts, and all weapons. You need to press start, and then some button combinations, to get to the cheat menu in the first place, mind you. Warrington. There's a section explaining how Hexen and Doom 64 are related. All a bit confusing, innit? Doom Team 2, Heretic Hexen, UV, they're all from similar stock, using the Doom engine and whatnot. Explains it all here, the family tree of Doom games, starting with Doom on the PC from ID Software, then Doom 2 also on PC, then Heretic which was based on Doom engine, then Hexen as a sequel to Heretic, and then Hexen on the N64 which is converted from the PC version, and Doom 64 on the N64 which is based on Doom and Doom 2 but with new levels. Blimey, complicated. And then there's a bit about Hexen itself. Medieval Doom, that's what it was always called. Magic weapons and monsters instead of sci-fi guns and demons. They mention the hub-based levels, which could be a bit of a pain to navigate, wandering around in circles. But they say it's got some nice variety in the levels. Churches and swamps and all that. Weapons and spells are a bit different too, apparently. Sounds like Hexen is alright then. A bit of a change from all the usual Doom clones. This page from the magazine, it's got a look at Hexen for the N64 in the import arena. Seems like a bit of a guide actually, with numbered screenshots showing you how to get through bits of the game, like finding keys and getting through doors. They're showing off this tower, and a cave and bits of the level, typical stuff for a guide back then. Warranty? Then there's a proper review bit where Jonathan's giving his thoughts. He's saying it's fueled by mana, blue and green, and you get flasks and special spells like a medieval grenade thing. Sounds a bit like Doom with swords. He mentions the Mace of Contrition, proper daft name that, but he reckons it's a decent weapon. Graphically, he's not that impressed, says it looks a bit like a badly tiled bathroom compared to the PC version. Charming. He's played Shadows of the Empire and Turok, and reckons Hexen's sprites are worse close up. Ouch. Multiplayer-wise, it's got split screen, deathmatch and coop. He thinks co-op is a nice idea, deathmatch is alright. He talks about monster clobbering, and dungeon exploring being the good bits. Then there's these little boxes breaking down the scores. Visuals are prehistoric by N64 standards. Sounds are decibels of spooky background effects. Mastery is, aside from split-screen mode, it's a 2-year-old PC game. Lifespan takes ages to battle through. And the verdict is ropey looking and sometimes overly time-consuming, but plenty of medieval action and some nice touches. Overall it gets 69%, so not a total disaster then. And it says to be continued, because they'll review the PPL version later in the year. So, bit of a mixed bag. Hexen on the N64. Sounds like it might be alright if you squint a bit and don't mind a bit of a trudge. This page shows a rather busy and colourful spread for a game called Just Trouble, or at least that's the biggest word on the page. It's flagged as an N64 star game, so it must be something decent, I suppose. Looks like it's from the import arena section, so probably another one of those Japanese titles that might be a bit quirky. There's a massive pile of mad-looking characters crammed together in the middle. All sorts of robots and cartoony blokes with guns and swords. It's a bit of a chaotic jumble really, you can't quite make head nor tail of what's actually going on. Down at the bottom there's a little girl-type character with a massive sword, and an old wizard geezer with a beard, so perhaps they are the main players. It's all a bit much if you ask me, but it's definitely grabbing your attention, isn't it? Makes you wonder what kind of madness they're trying to sell you this time. Still, it's for the N64, so it's probably got some decent gameplay under all that visual noise. Looks like they're trying to make it seem a bit mental and exciting, which I suppose is the point. This page in N64 Magazine seems to be giving us a look at Enix's new game, Makers, or Go! Troublemakers as it's properly known. Bit of an odd title, isn't it? They're even pointing out the exclamation marks themselves, which is a bit much. Anyway, this is level 1, the village, and apparently some professor bloke has been kidnapped, incompetently mind you, according to them. We're playing as Marina, some no-face character, who's off to help this old chap in the village, Ryu. Anyway, looking at the info box, it's already out in Japan. Typical. We're stuck with TBA DAS over here in the UK. It's a 64 meg cart, uses one controller, and has on-cartridge backup, fancy that. Price is around 8,900 yen, which they reckon is about 45 quid. Seems steepish for back then. They've got a few screenshots dotted around showing off bits of the level. In one, you're lobbing time bombs at red blocks apparently. Only the red ones blow up. Good to know. Another shows a mini-boss. Some kind of worm creature bothering a farmer called Pitch. You've got to rescue him from this wily string beast. Sounds like a laugh. There's another bit where you can apparently hurl passers-by as weapons. Bit brutal, but they say it's better than a proper weapon, and the bloke's indestructible, so no harm done I suppose. Then there's a massive robot made of blocks, called Chappie you can ride on. Looks a bit clunky but could be fun. And flying with balloons is in there too, and apparently, you can chat to balloon fellows and ricochet them around. Right then. Towards the end of the level, you're heading to a fort, and a volcano erupts to make it tricky to get in. They mention something about gripping and spinning off floating face switches using the D-pad and B button, which sounds like standard platforming fare. And then there's this weird bit in a box called Edward Munch. Apparently almost everyone in the game looks like that screaming fella from the famous painting. They even say, "We do not know why this is so." Bit odd that. Still, it's August 97, so we're getting closer to Christmas game releases, and this Troublemakers thing might be worth keeping an eye on, even if it does sound a bit bonkers. This page of N64 Magazine seems to be giving us a sneak peek at Mischief Makers. Right at the top there's a bit about the save system, typical N64 memory pack nonsense, only 2 save slots, and apparently deleting a game save is more complicated than it needs to be, involving selecting a star and highlighting a player. Sounds like a right faff. Then we get into the game proper with level 2, Fifime. It's set in a volcano, naturally. The reviewer mentions robotic housemaid senses, whatever they are, and that the professor is nearby, presumably the bloke we're trying to rescue. Looks like your standard platforming fare here. Fireballs, switches that rotate the screen, and collapsing platforms that sound a bit dodgy if you hang about too long. Apparently after escaping all that fiery chaos, you end up facing a giant wasp. Or maybe a bee, who knows with these Japanese games. Flipping over to level 3, SNO, things have got a bit chilly. Apparently the professor has been replaced by a snowman with a fake head. Sounds about right, for a bit of bonkers Japanese humor. This level has rockets you can surf on, a tricky bit involving leaping off to grab power-ups, and a new skill where you catch items and mix them. Fireworks are mentioned, which probably means things are about to get a bit explodey. There's also a mini-boss, described as a relaxingly unthreatening mini-boss, which is a bit of a backhanded compliment if you ask me. It's something to do with sports day and maths ball, and apparently, the boss is a cat. Right then. Finally, there's a proper boss fight described. Wolf Bloke, who starts off with a gun, and then morphs into some multi-part manga-esque form, including a razor-legged horse. It all sounds a bit much, to be honest, but they say you beat him with help from the Sports Day cat. It's all quite strange, this game, isn't it? Still, Mischief Makers, it was something a bit different back then on the N64, wasn't it? This page is all about the import scene, specifically a game called Troublemakers on the N64. Seems like they're calling it Import Arena here, probably a regular section. Right at the top, it's diving straight into level 4, Underground. Apparently this Wolf Bloke character is directing you to his mate Hard Bloke, and you've got to penetrate his sedimentary lair, which sounds a bit dodgy for a kid's game, doesn't it? There are some screenshots, showing what looks like platforming sections and some kind of boss fight, maybe Hard Bloke himself. They mention freeing 6 good guys by beating them up, which is a bit of a weird concept. And then there's something about an interlude, where you become Chappie racing to save Marina. Sounds like it's throwing a lot at you. Oh, and they mention a thrillingly exacting rock chase bit, which, knowing these games, probably means frustratingly difficult. Then it jumps to level 5, Sinister. Hard Bloke's apparently drawn a map to the Sinister Pipe's secret base, and you're up against Errant Lance Bloke. More screenshots, showing some kind of road battle with rockets, and then what they call the best puzzle in the game. Sounds like they are laying it on thick with the praise. There's a bit about a cameo from the original incompetent kidnapper, which is a bit cryptic, and they tease the final boss being hidden in shadows. There's a plot device section, trying to explain the story about little no-face people called Troublemakers, kidnapping Professor Gambe Gombe. The reviewer even admits they're a bit lost with the plot, saying you should just make up your own, which is pretty funny and probably true for most of these games back then. They're clearly a bit bemused by the whole thing, mentioning things like, why is Chappie so wretched all the time? It's all a bit bonkers, but I guess that's the charm of these Japanese imports, isn't it? Pure madness. Ah, 1997, simpler times, eh? This page features a section called Import Arena, and it's all about a game called Just Marina, and another called Just Chappie. Must be Japanese imports then. So for Marina, she's apparently a robotic housemaid, and the game sounds a bit bonkers. Something about punching some lecherous professor. It mentions her legs end in points, which is a bit odd for housework, and she has a jetpack. It's saying the controls are a bit different, as it doesn't use the analog stick at all, just the D, P, A, D and C buttons. Delba. Then there's Chappie. He's described as a bit of an enigma, helping out at some points. Apparently he might be the Sinister Pipe's ex-girlfriend, which is, well, interesting. When Marina gets blasted with a ray gun, Chappie has to find a special module to revive her. Bit of a damsel in distress situation reversal there perhaps. Both sections then break down the controls for the N64 pad. For Marina, the D-pad moves her around and double tapping lets you dash. Down makes her duck and use a potion pot. It also aims objects for throwing. The B button swings a punch, apparently incredibly heavy. Triple tap it for a super powerful blow. And up plus B is a jumping uppercut. If you hit a monster twice, they fall down. The A button is for jump, up to 3 times in a row, and down plus A for a sliding attack. A then up lets you hang from the ceiling, and then down to drop on enemies. The C pad steers her jetpack, and you need to be in the air to use it, either by dashing or rolling. It's a burst of speed, and you have to keep tapping up and down to hover. UP, D and C makes you hover higher, and then UPC at the peak of a jump gives a super jump. Sounds like a fair bit to get your head around. L and R buttons are for speeding up texting conversations and speaking to folks. Warrington Miller. For Chappie, the D-pad moves him left and right or puts him on guard. Double tap for dash, but they say Chappie is too angsty for it to work well. The B button is similar to Marina's, a heavy punch. Triple tap for a super blow. Up and B gives a jumping uppercut. A is jump, up to 3 times. Down plus A is a sliding attack. Take care. There's also a bit about diamonds and their uses. Common blue and green diamonds replenish energy. If you already have full energy, you get extra lives, up to 3. Red and yellow diamonds apparently do something else the game shows you. Collecting red diamonds lets you buy another go if you fail a level, and you can revisit levels and collect more. They even rank your performance from A to D, depending on how fast you finish a level. Yellow diamonds are for tough courses and maneuvers, and are apparently useful later in the game. They pay for cutscenes at the end of the game. 17 diamonds only gets you to the point where Chappie cries in the victory celebrations. Bit stingy perhaps. Sounds like one of those import games that's a bit quirky and different. Might be worth a look if you're after something a bit off the wall. This page is a review from back in the day, must be 97, looking at the N64 logo there, and it's all about troublemakers for the N64. Seems like they're really chuffed with it, calling it the finest game from Treasure. You remember them, the Gunstar heroes lot proper pedigree. This reviewer, some bloke called Jonathan Nash, reckons it's packed with excitement and imagination, and folks in the office were proper hooked, fighting over who gets to play next. He even mentioned some bloke called Bill who's given it a bit of stick, but the reviewer's having none of it, basically telling Bill to wind his neck in. There's a bunch of screenshots showing off the madcap action. Looks like your typical Treasure craziness with loads going on, bright colors and bonkers characters. They're highlighting how you can grab monsters and chuck them about. Even bombs apparently. Sounds right up their street. He talks about teleporting into fights and levels where you're parking a tricycle in the snow. Just proper Japanese game lunacy. They even compare it to Star Fox 64, saying if you like that you'll like this, which is high praise at the time. Star Fox 64 was the dog's bollocks then. There's a bit about the bosses. Apparently they've got daft names like Baron, Stinger and Goriete, and some unmentioned sinister pipe, typical N64 mag humor. They're saying the game's a bit incomprehensible, but in a charming way, and the clues are workable, which I guess means it's not unfairly difficult. They've given it 7 out of 10 for visuals, sounds and mastery, and a whopping 9 for lifespan. Reckon it's proper difficult, and will keep you going for ages. Overall verdict is a massive 90%, calling it magnificently entertaining and epically silly, and giving Treasure a bless. So yeah, they proper loved it. Proper Treasure game then, by the sounds of it. This page on Import Arena in N64 Magazine, issue 5 if you're keeping count, is all about the game Dark Rift. Right in the middle of the page, you can't miss it, big bold letters. Seems to be a beat-em-up type game. Judging by the screenshots, very 3D, bit like Virtua Fighter 1 suppose, but perhaps a bit darker in tone given the name. They've got a little box out to the side, saying it's by Vic Tokai, and it's out now in the States, for $80, which they reckon is about 50 quid. Looks like we're still waiting for it over here in Blighty, marked as TBA, to 64 meg cart, uses half a controller. Not sure what that's about, maybe 2-player with 1 controller each. And on cartridge backup, which is always a bonus, no messing with memory packs for this one. Jokey. The screenshots show some of the characters duking it out. There's one called Aaron chatting some nonsense about light switches, typical fighting game banter. Another one mentions throwing people making the energy bars vanish, and something about spinning camera activity. Sounds a bit dizzying. Then there's some flavor text, bit over the top, calling someone a motherless apple-dealing earthsucker. Haha, bit much isn't it? Talk about Eve challenging Demonica in the Garden of Eden. Sounds like they're trying to be all deep and meaningful with the story. And Aaron doing some nasty thing with Jelly. Not entirely sure what that's about. Probably best not to think too hard. And finally, Sonok, a boss character apparently, striking a victory pose, looking rather pleased with himself. All in all, Dark Rift looks like it could be a laugh if you're into your fighting games, especially if you're importing stuff. £50 though, ouch, that's a fair whack for a game back then. This page is about Dark Rift for the N64, which was a beat-em-up game, not a thrash metal band from Sheffield apparently, bit of a joke there. It's an import game, hence Import Arena at the top, remember those days? There's a section titled, Don't Give Up, which talks about the developer Kronos being American, and behind Dark Rift. They made Eternal Champions on the Mega Drive and Mega CD, which they say had comic book heroes duking it out with special moves, and got a lukewarm reception from Sega fans. Then there's Criticom for PlayStation and Saturn, another 3D fighter, apparently one of the early ones, but reviews weren't great, and folks preferred Tekken 2 or Virtua Fighter 2, fair enough. Prittle. Down below, they talk about Dark Rift again on the N64, saying, well, here we are again. They reckon Kronos made average beat-em-ups on 16-bit and 64-bit before this. The reviewer seems a bit unsure whether to admire their persistence or have a go at them for just being mediocre. They think anyone paying full price might be a bit miffed and that Kronos hasn't really shown they're going to make a truly great game. Ouch. Kinda me. In the screenshots you can see characters like Gore fighting Demonica, and then Morphix up against Eve. There's a comment about Gore being a bit gnarly, and landscapes being the gnarliest of landscapes. Bit much maybe. And then another bit about Aaron packing a gun. Not very sporting tournament etiquette, is it? They call him a bit bulbous in the Wanehead fashion, whatever that means. Seems a bit of a mixed bag, this Dark Rift. Nothing too exciting. Probably better off sticking with Mario 64 at the time. This page from N64 Magazine, issue 5, takes me right back. It's an import arena section, which was always a bit exciting back then, getting a peek at games from Japan before your mates did, or sometimes even before they came out here at all. The big thing on this page is a review of a game called Dark Rift. Blimey, remember that one? They're making a bit of a fuss about how dark it is, like literally dark on the telly, saying they had to whack up the brightness just to see what was going on. Sounds about right for some of those early 3D fighters, a bit murky. Yep, bass. They've got a few screenshots dotted about. Looks like your typical polygonal beat-em-up characters. One chap is green and muscly, another is red with big claws. Not exactly pushing the N64 to its limits visually, if I'm honest. Even back then, the reviewer, ZY, doesn't sound overly impressed, calling it average, and a hollow replica of better games like Soul Edge. Ouch. They reckon it's a bit of a clone of Tekken and Virtua Fighter 2, which was pretty common for 3D fighters at the time. Everyone was trying to grab a slice of that pie. There's a Simon Says box, listing out special moves for different characters. Aaron, Dominica, Eve, Gore, Morphix, Nikki, Scarlet, Zenmaron. Move lists were always a bit of a faff in magazines, squinting at UPC left C, UPC back left C, and trying to actually pull it off in the game. It's all chain combos and ground hits, the usual fighting game stuff. Okay. Then there's a breakdown of the ratings. 6 for visuals, created for moles, they joke. 3 for sound, 4 for mastery, 5 for lifespan. Not exactly glowing praise, is it? The verdict is pretty lukewarm. Competent, if uninspired, and they give it 72%. Bit of a meh game then, filling the gap between other better titles. We'll do loads more on Dark Rift, if it ever appears in the UK. Classic magazine humour, hinting it might be rubbish and not even worth importing. Yeah, Dark Rift, vaguely remember it now. Key. Probably didn't miss much. This page here is about the Japanese version of Shadows of the Empire on the N64. It seems the game has already been released over in Japan, and we're getting a look at what they think of it. There are a few screenshots showing some snowy levels, looks a bit like Huth from Empire Strikes Back, with Wampas and ATSTs kicking about. There's even a bit of banter between Luke and Leia about Wampas for breakfast, classic Star Wars stuff. Apparently Shadows of the Empire is doing alright in Japan, which is a bit of a surprise, as these sorts of spin-offs don't always do well there. They reckon the Japanese version might be a bit easier than what we're used to, which is a bit of a shame. They mention something about the difficulty level being tweaked. The review boxes are interesting. Accessibility basically says even if you can't read Japanese you can still play it, it's mostly point and shoot. Visually they say it's a bit hit and miss. Good in the flying bits, not so great in the doom bits, which I guess means the on-foot sections. Sound is decent, even if the music isn't stereo, but the sound effects are good. Gorn. Mastery box is quite funny, saying it looks a bit old hat now, especially as we've all been playing GoldenEye this week. That's a fair point, GoldenEye has really moved the goalposts for first-person shooters. Lifespan is apparently lessened because it's too easy in this Japanese version. The verdict is a bit lukewarm, they reckon it's been tweaked for Japan, but not in a way that UK gamers will appreciate. They've given it 75%, which isn't bad, but not amazing either. They'd previously reviewed the UK version, and gave that 78%, so a bit lower for this one. Seems like they're saying if you've already got the UK version, maybe don't bother importing this Japanese one. Unless you're a massive Star Wars completist, I suppose. This page, it's a bit of a throwback to E3 in Atlanta, back in '97. Looks like the N64 Magazine crew were there, battling the crowds and checking out the games. You've got the show daily newspaper, freebie tat you'd grab on the way in, and the Atlanta E3 program, probably full of maps and booth locations, essential stuff back then to navigate those massive halls. There's a THQ badge, so they must have been pushing their wrestling games. Remember WCW vs NWO? They were all the rage on the N64 at the time. And then of course GoldenEye 007 gets a look in, a screenshot there, probably still blowing minds back then. Tim Weaver got a press badge, doing his journalistic duty for us readers. The headline "How to Make It Throw" is a bit mysterious. Throw what exactly? Probably the crowds and the endless press conferences. Down at the bottom you can see a floor plan, looked like a right maze, these shows. And a mention for Bethesda Softworks too, they were around even then, beavering away. Pretty standard E3 page really, captures the vibe of the time. This page from issue 71 of N64 Magazine, August 1997, is diving into E3, bless 'em. Yug 3 alive. Yeah, that pretty much sums up the feeling. A bit overwhelming to say the least. Looks like young Tim Weaver, our intrepid reporter, is getting his passport sorted to head off to the States for this massive games do. In the background there you can spot Donkey Kong and Diddy Kong. No surprises there, Nintendo were always front and center at these things, weren't they? There's a quote about it being big and loud and busy. Oh yeah, tell me about it. And dotted around are some names like Fujitsu and Jack of all games, must be companies or stands at the show. And a little guide. How to make it through E3 alive. Probably a lifesaver for anyone actually there, those shows were intense. This page from the old N64 magazine, issue 5 no less, takes us back to E3 in '97, remember those days? It's a bit of a travelogue diary piece, broken down into Tuesday and Wednesday, chronicling the journey to Atlanta and the first day at the show. Tuesday kicks off with the writer arriving in Atlanta, in a downpour, classic British holiday weather, even in America it seems. They're moaning about the airport being massive, which, yeah, American airports, always a trek. There's a bit about the taxi rank being run by a strange old coot. Sounds like a typical encounter. They end up at the Ramada Downtown Hotel, which they describe as a bit Travelodge-like, but then mention cockroaches and gunshots and neon signs, painting a charming picture of downtown Atlanta, eh? They even jokingly compare it to Taxi Driver. The humor is dry, as you like. There's a little aside about the smell of vomit and police sirens, and a chair jammed under the door handle for security. Proper classy establishment then. Wednesday starts at the Georgia World Congress Center. Apparently, just about the biggest building in the world. Bit of an exaggeration perhaps. It's so big the whole of E3 only takes up one floor again, a bit of a dig. They mention the CNN Center, and world-famous news stations being nearby, setting the scene. Breakfast was a banana bran muffin and croissant. Not exactly a full English, is it? They joke about the fatty food they ate. Fried chicken, cheeseburgers, chips and pizza, saying they had enough grease on their skin to provide Castrol with raw materials for a decade. Classic British overstatement. Then it's into the show itself, finding a Southern US water conference. Sounds thrilling. They eventually find the press registration and get their neck tag for posterity. Very droll. There's a comment about the fuss being about a window, but through it they can only see a fifth of the show floor. Finally, there's a little mention of the shaman from Banjo-Kazooie peering from the Nintendo stand, which gives us a proper game reference at last. Banjo-Kazooie, yeah, that was something special back then, wasn't it? Looking back, it's all a bit cynical and sarcastic, but that's half the fun of these old magazine articles, innit? This page then takes us back to E3 in '97. Blimey, that was a while ago. Sounds like this journalist had a proper trek just to get into the show. Queues for days it seems. Classic E3. He's on about the noise and the crowds. Well, it's a game show, what do you expect? He manages to get his hands on Banjo-Kazooie. Fair play, that was the game everyone wanted to see, and it was looking pretty special at the time. Gets a bit stuck on it, mind you, probably not played many platformers. Then he gets ambushed by some media blokes grilling him about Banjo-Kazooie with their massive microphones. Bit much, isn't it? He mentions demos of GoldenEye and Conker's Quest 2, yeah, those were the big hitters everyone was queuing up for, remember those days? He also sneaks in a go on Lamborghini 64 and Top Gear Rally. Must have been trying to fit everything in. Says he got blistered fingers playing GoldenEye. Showing off a bit, I reckon, but we were all hooked on that one at the time. Down at the bottom, Shig speaks. That's Miyamoto, having his say. He's talking about Star Fox 64, reckons they're trying to make it atmospheric, whatever that means for a shooter, probably just means a bit darker. He's also on about Pocket Monsters 64, or Pokemon as we know it now, not sure when it's coming out in the States apparently. F-Zero 64, and Yoshi's Island 64 get a mention as well, and something about Super Mario RPG 2, bit cryptic that one. He finishes by saying he's impressed with Banjo-Kazooie. Well, everyone was. It was rare, at their peak. This page is a bit of a blast from the past, innit? Looks like a double-page spread from an old N64 mag, issue 5 by the looks of it. It's a how-to feature, chronicling someone's time at what must be E3 back in '97. Friday kicks off with GoldenEye 007 naturally. The reviewer is playing it, and seems pretty chuffed, zooming in with the sniper rifle, proper Bond style. They're talking about setting tracking devices on boats, sounds like the good old dam level or something similar. There's a picture of some promo girls for GoldenEye, looking very 90s. Gigi. Then it jumps to Extreme G, a futuristic racer. They reckon it's miles better than Wipeout and incredibly fast, which for the time was quite a bold statement. There's a photo of it in action, looks properly speedy. They mention Probe's Ultra Soccer 2, which apparently Acclaim picked up and revamped after developers got all excited about ISS 64, International Superstar Soccer 64 to you and me. Konami get a bit of a ribbing for playing the same song over and over again on their stand, something about K-O-N-A-M-I, classic Konami, eh? Saturday starts with Konami again, their stand looking like some kind of castle, suits everywhere, doing business, proper corporate types. They then wander over to Hybrid Heaven, that strange wrestling RPG they were banging on about at the time. They saw a video of Nagano Winter Olympics '98, reckon it's spellbinding. Someone even thought it was going to be an RPG, bless 'em. There's a screenshot of Hybrid Heaven, looking all moody and Resident Evil-ish. They move on to Hexen and Duke Nukem 64, bit of a mixed bag there in terms of quality, let's be honest. Then it's on to San Francisco Rush Arcade Machine, which they seem to enjoy until some joker interrupts. Turns out it's Chris, who developed San Francisco Rush for Arcade and N64. Small world. In it, they get properly trounced at it, humiliated even, before having a quick go on Lamborghini 64 by Titus on the way out. Ending on a picture of a hotel room, captions saying you'll sleep well after E3. Yeah, knackered and probably slightly deaf after all that noise, more like. This page from N64 Magazine, blimey, it's taking us back a bit, isn't it? It's all about the results of some competition they ran, issue 3 if you can believe it, where readers had to design a controller plug-in. They were giving away an Aurora N64 system and a pile of games. Pretty decent prize back then. So, what you had to do section, right, basically they loved Star Fox 64, gave it 94% in issue 3, raving about the graphics and sound. They were also proper chuffed with the rumble packs, that vibrating thing you slotted into the controller. That was a novelty at the time, feeling your R-wings rumble in your hands. Anyway, it got them thinking what else you could plug into the controller. A bit of a brainstorming session really, but they opened it up to the readers. And the winner is? Well, they hadn't actually announced the winner yet. Classic magazine tease. Apparently there were loads of entries, and it was a right job to judge them all. Harder than a Blue Peter painting competition apparently, which is saying something if you remember those. Then there's a bit called No Pain, No Gain, listing ideas that were a bit too extreme. Things like Spike from Tom Chris Trent, hammer packs from a few people, Stuart Wilson's rubber band pack. Sounds like some torture device ideas there, not sure they'd sell many of those. Then, Ain't No Point section, which is all the daft ideas that weren't really controllers. Snap pack, fridge pack, time pack, pager pack, bog roll pack, macker. Just a bit silly really. Macker. And finally, top 10 runners-up. Oliver Ashford from Kent came 10th with a crisps and coke pack for refreshments, classic gamer fuel. Greg Wallen of Surrey had a Spectrum Fuel pack with rubber keys, a nod to the old Spexy there. There were a few pack ideas for stress relief, like the tension pack with a squeezy ball. Tom Radcliffe from Dorset had a colour pack to change the joypad colour. Bit pointless really. Someone had a Tamagotchi pack to play with your virtual pet. Then we've got coffee pack and tea pack for hot drinks, very British. Whoopee pack, a seat of your pants driver from Tim Evans, bit weird. Smarty pack for sweets, and speech fuel pack, rubber gloves again, whoopee pack. So yeah, a right mixed bag of controller ideas, some good, some bad, some just plain bonkers. Typical magazine filler, but it was interesting to see what people came up with. Takes you back to simpler times when all this N64 stuff was brand new and exciting, doesn't it? This page showcases some readers' ideas for N64 add-ons, bit of a gallery section they called it, for the How to Win competition. Looks like everyone was a winner technically, but a David Nixdorf from Cheshire is named as the winner. His winning idea was the Hamster Pack, a controller mod with a hamster inside, apparently to retrieve your joypad when you lob it across the room in frustration. They joke about it being cruel to animals, unless it's a plastic hamster, like a computer mouse, bit cheeky. There are a few other entries featured too. We've got the Excitement Pack and Nervous Breakdown Pack, playing on the emotional rollercoaster of gaming I suppose. Then there's the Holo Pack, which is a holographic projector for your N64, showing 3D images. Sounds a bit far-fetched, even for back then. The Tackle Pack is a boot that gives you electric shocks when you get tackled in games. They reckon it's good for Mario 64 and ISS 64, ouch. Annoy Boy is a little speaker and screen you plug in to annoy people naturally. Then we have the Boy Pack, which seems to be a handheld N64, precursor to the Switch maybe? Pedal Pack is foot pedals for racing games, not a bad shout actually. Wheelchair/bucket pack is a controller mounted on a wheelchair with a bucket. Right then. And finally, Color Boy Pack, which looks like it's for customizing your controller color, bit like those colored Game Boy things. Overall, a right mixed bag of ideas, some bonkers, some maybe bordering on genius, and some just plain daft, typical reader submissions page, isn't it? Good for a chuckle anyway. This page is all about how to cheat at multiplayer. Mario Kart 64 Cheeky. The article is written by Tim Weaver and the heading asks, why play fair and lose when you can cheat and win? Tarker. Bit strong, but alright. Tarker. It talks about the warm glow you get, beating your mates at Mario Kart 64, and suggests if you are sneaky, then cheating is the way to go. There are 3 techniques detailed here. The first is Turbo Start, which is pretty standard really. You get a speed boost at the start by pressing A between the second and third light. Apparently Lakitu floats down with the lights, which I suppose he does. Then there's Dropping Back, which is about intentionally falling behind to get better power-ups like lightning, in 5th or 6th place. It says this is much better than being at the front, which is a fair point I suppose if you are playing dirty. Finally, there is slipstreaming, which is described as a strange old technique, and if you get close enough to the cart in front, little wisps of smoke appear, and you can drift past them for a burst of speed if you are good enough with the analog stick. They say it's sporadically useful, but worth it near the finish line. There are screenshots showing these techniques in action in the game, and pictures of Peach, Bowser and Donkey Kong looking quite pleased with themselves. Classic Mario Kart 64 really, causing arguments and ruining friendships since '97. Good times. This page in N64 Magazine is all about getting a leg up in Mario Kart 64, proper handy if you ask me. It's got a few different bits on it, kicking off with Thunderbolts. They reckon you should be a right sneaky sort, and keep an eye on the other racers so you can zap them with a Thunderbolt, just as they're coming up to a jump. Apparently, that sends them spinning and plummeting down. Which is a bit evil but good fun, eh? They mention Wario Stadium as a prime spot for this, just before the big jump there. Warrants. Then there's fake items. Always thought they were a bit rubbish to be honest, but the magazine reckons they're not completely useless. They say don't waste them in the open but stick them in amongst a bunch of real item boxes to try and trick people. Only works on proper numpties though, let's be honest. Next up, shortcuts. They're having a bit of a debate about whether shortcuts are really worth it, especially in multiplayer. Says they're great for time trial, knocking seconds off on Koopa Troopa Beach and Rainbow Road. But in a race against your mates, those risky shortcuts in Mario Raceway and Wario Stadium might just end up with you looking like a right prat when you mess them up. Probably true that. After that, it's all about bananas. Standard banana tactics, really chucking them about to mess with people, especially near jumps and bridges. They even go into being a proper sneaky banana king by weaving across the track. Then there's expert banana and shell deployment, showing you how to fire green shells and bananas backwards, and even hold a banana behind you to block shells, except for those pesky spiny shells of course, nothing stops those. Finally, banana avoidance. Basically saying if you see a banana and you're going sideways, tap the brake to try and straighten up. Might work, might not, depends how lucky you are I suppose. All in all, a decent little cheat sheet for Mario Kart 64, to give you the edge over your mates. This page screams 90s gaming, doesn't it? It's all about winning a magnificent trophy in a Mario Kart championship, apparently sponsored by N64 Magazine. You could win that pretty sizable looking trophy there, and a bottle of Lindauer bubbly too, which is probably what you'd need after a tense Mario Kart 64 session with your mates. It's issue 5 of the magazine, back in '97, page 80, so pretty early days for the N64 really, and they are pushing Mario Kart naturally, as it was a system seller, wasn't it? Good times, good times. This page is all about a Mario Kart 64 championship run by N64 Magazine. Seems like they were trying to find the best player in Europe, bit of a bold claim really. It's for the Mario Kart 64 game naturally, and it's stage 1, so I guess they were planning more of these if this one went well. Then they were asking people to send in their best time trial scores on Mario Raceway, you know, the first track. Pretty straightforward. They were going to compile these times over 3 months, and make a monthly league table. For all that effort, the winner gets a specially engraved Gold Effect Cup, which sounds alright actually, probably a bit naff in reality. It mentions something from last month's Tips Extra, asking for times already. So this is kind of a follow-up. They're saying it's going to be a big video gaming event. Alright, settle down lads, it's just Mario Kart 64. Still, everyone loved that game back then, to be fair. It was definitely the big multiplayer game on the N64 at the time. They were going to feature the times in the next 3 issues of the magazine. Good old N64 Magazine. Always trying to get us involved. This page is all about a Mario Kart 64 championship, back in the day when you actually sent stuff in via post, can you believe it? They were asking for your best time on Mario Raceway in time trial mode. Proper old school, you had to either photograph your telescreen or even videotape it to prove you weren't fibbing. Imagine the faff. You had to write your name, address and time on the picture or tape. And they even had a coupon to fill in from the magazine. Deadline was July 31st, so no dilly-dallying if you wanted to enter stage 1. They'd collate all the times and put them in the next issue, issue 6, and then there'd be more stages and coupons in the following issues, issues 7 and 8. For the top drivers, they were promising a golden trophy and all the glory in N64 Magazine issue 9. Fancy that. There's a section called Prove It, going into more detail about how to take a photo or video of your telescreen, turn the lights off, use the flash, or even record it on videotape and send that in. It's like going back to the Stone Age compared to how we do things now. Then there's a Mario Raceway tips section giving some advice on fast starts, drifting around corners, and even hopping with mushrooms. Basic stuff really, but helpful for some folks back then I suppose. Warren knew. And finally, there's a bit about Can't Do the Shortcut, discussing that cheeky wall hopping shortcut on Mario Raceway. They reckon it's probably cheating, but they still ran a separate table for times without using it, for the virtuous Mario Kart players. Honor amongst thieves and all that. You could even tick a box on the coupon if you were a gentleman racer and didn't use the shortcut. And there's a little screenshot of Mario Kart 64, bringing back memories of split-screen multiplayer and lobbing red shells at your mates. Simple times. This page is all about the Mario Kart 64 championship they're running in the magazine. It's for bragging rights mainly, and maybe a little prize if you're nippy enough on Rainbow Road or wherever they're racing on. Down the left there's a timetable explaining how it all works. It's in stages, in it, stage 1, then stage 2, stage 3, and then a final. Closing dates for each stage are mentioned and what issue of the mag the results will be in, classic magazine stuff, pushing the next issue of course. Jaya. Then bang in the middle is the preliminary heats table. Looks like they've already had a load of entries. These are the top 10 times so far, for Mario Raceway. Blimey, some of these times are pretty rapid. Top of the pile is Andrew Mills from Londonderry, with a 1 minute 9 seconds and 29, that's quick going. Apparently he's already won a controller for being so fast, lucky sod. The list goes down to 10th place with Daniel Smith from London. Good effort from all of them I suppose, worry cool. At the bottom right, there's a stage 1 entry form, bit of a cutout job, asking what character you used, your time. You have to tick boxes to say you followed the rules, like using the UK PAL version. No wall hopping cheats, they were always a bit of a grey area, weren't they? Space for your name and address, standard competition form really. You had to send in photographic or video proof of your time, which was fair enough to stop any fibbers. Chi. So yeah, Mario Kart 64 Championship, get your entries in if you reckon you're a whiz on Mario Raceway. Good bit of fun for the mag, gets people involved, and showing off their skills. Might have to dust off the old N64, and give it a whirl myself actually, see if I'm still any good. This page is a bit of a blast from the past, isn't it? It's from N64 Magazine, and it's all about getting a perfect high score in Super Mario 64. This is the final part of their guide, apparently, focusing on level 11, Wet Dry World. Course 11, they're calling it. Perfect rating. 152 inches they reckon you should be aiming for. They're going through Wet Dry World, pointing out where to grab all the coins, like breaking targets and boxes near the tubes. Seems pretty thorough. They say make sure you've got all the coins before taking the plunge. There's a bit about the blue switch too, saying you need to drain all the water to use the cannon to get to the sunken city. Clever stuff back then, figuring all this out. And then there's the heave-ho bit, those clockwork dustbin things. Apparently they can give you a lift, but watch out for the death loop, classic Nintendo trickery. They say they can't be destroyed, good to know. Down at the bottom there's an N64, just can't get enough Mario high score table. They've listed a load of courses, from Bobomb Battlefield right through to Rainbow Ride. And they've got columns for total coinage, and N64 Hiscore. Looks like they are setting coin collection challenges for each level, with their own high scores listed out. Tall Mountain seems to be the big one for coins, a whopping 192. Rainbow Ride on the other hand, a paltry 164, with a question mark after it, cheeky. Right at the bottom it says previously in N64, mentioning issue 4 for part 1 of this perfect score guide, and it's all penned by ZY Nicholson. or should I say Zy Nicholson. Seems like they were really milking this Mario 64 thing for all it was worth, but you know what, back then, we lapped it up. Every little tip and trick was gold dust when you were trying to master that game. Happy days. This page is a right proper guide to getting a perfect score on Super Mario 64, proper deep dive into course 12, which is Tall Mountain. They reckon the perfect rating is 137. Blimey, good luck with that. The main tip is to just rinse and repeat the slide race at the start for 1 hour. Oops. Sounds like a grind, but effective, I suppose. Mind you, they warn about losing coins from bow bombs, those pesky blighters, and point out a shortcut on Tall Mountain that they somehow missed before, involving a leap of faith and a purple chuckya. Cheers for the heads up, lads. Very helpful. Almost like they didn't playtest it properly themselves, eh? There's bits about enemies like chuckyas apparently you can use their bombs to get rid of them. Bit of karmic justice there. Flamethrowers, they're indestructible, but setting Mario on fire can have its uses on slopes. Risky business. And skeeters, those pond skater things, worth hardly anything. 3 coins. Not even worth the effort, just squash 'em. They even have a bit called Where's Wally? Turns out, if you got a second controller you could mess about with the camera in the end credits. How about that for a groundbreaking feature? And something about a matter of life and death. Rambling about Koji Kondo's music and needing 70 stars to finish the game. Not exactly news to anyone who's played it, is it? Oh, and apparently Yoshi reckons you can do a super jump by triple flipping from the castle roof into the moat. They reckon it's pointless though, and they've never found a proper use for it. Sounds about right. Typical Nintendo secrets. Intriguing but ultimately useless. Ah, simpler times back then, eh? Just figuring out how to get past Big Boo's haunt was a challenge for a Saturday afternoon. This page then is a bit of a how-to guide for Super Mario 64 from what looks like an old N64 mag, must be from back in the day, 1997 maybe. It's focusing on course 13, Tiny Huge Land, remember that one? Mad really, switching between small and giant. They've broken it down into sections, like wooden posts, which are crowned by these wooden post things you need to launch yourself up to using a Shy Guy. A bit of a gamble, in it. Apparently someone found a way of jumping to write to them about it if you know how. Then there's Blue Switch, which is up the mountain. To get a decent high score, you need to go inside the mountain, get all the red and blue coins, and then get out again to finish up by beating the Wiggler boss and grabbing the 10 coins in his lair. Sounds like a bit of a faff, but gotta get those coins, eh? Bubba is the big fish, a jazzed up version of Boss Bass, slow but threatening. One hit kill if you get swallowed apparently, so watch out for that then. Micro Goombas are described as a perfectionist's nightmare. They vanish in smoke if they hit you before you hit them, and you lose a coin. They recommend the low roundhouse kick to deal with them, crouching with Z and hitting B as they charge. Says it's better than jumps or butt slams, good to know. Yes. Giant Goombas are easier, just jump on them for a yellow coin. They suggest using a butt slam or flattening them with a pop for a blue coin. Apparently they're immune to the Koopa shell, so don't bother trying that then. Lakitu is mentioned as being related to your own camera guy, but not in a friendly way. Double jump to get rid of him and watch out for the spiny mines he drops, which can hurt or stop a Koopa shell. Apparently you can nudge them off ledges into the water if you're careful. Lastly, there's a cap trick section, telling you how Mario can lose his cap in courses 8, 10 and 12, Shifting Sandland, Snowman's Land and Tall Mountain. Then goes into a bit of a glitch in Shifting Sandland with the vulture and teleporting palm trees to get multiple caps and fly without wing power-ups. A bit cheeky. Those were the days of glitches and exploits, eh? Mind you, game might crash if you get around 50 feet spares, so don't get too greedy. This page is all about getting the perfect score in Super Mario 64. Blimey, those were the days, weren't they? It's focusing on course 14, Tick-Tock Clock, and course 15, Rainbow Ride. For Tick-Tock Clock, they are banging on about using the wall kick shortcut, and reckon the only real enemies are bow bombs at the start. Makes sense. Apparently if you're short on coins, there's an unreckon box under the clock hand. Cheeky. Then for Rainbow Ride, they're saying it's a bit of a pain to get all 6 stars in one go, without messing up and losing coins. Seems about right. Rainbow Ride was a proper test. Warrant, there's a section called Become the Undead, which is a bit of a weird one. Apparently, if you've got a Japanese copy of the game, you can become undead by getting to 1000 coins after battling Bowser in Dark World, and your lives counter changes to M25. Mad, they even say European carts stop working after 999 coins, typical. The Death Loop section is about getting infinite cannon shots on course 11. Sounds like a glitch to me, but hey, whatever works. Pah. They also mention Blue Switch, which is about getting blue coins after triggering a switch in Tick-Tock Clock, and Shortcut, which is a wall kick trick, again in Tick-Tock Clock for star 4, and Silly Thing about mushrooms in Tick-Tock Clock, and donut planks on Rainbow Ride warning you about the disappearing platforms. At the bottom, there's a bit saying, "Want some more?" Then ferret out Z's How to Get 70 Stars as Fast as Possible guide in issue 3. Z's guides were always alright, weren't they? Good times? Good times? This page from the magazine, right, it's all about getting through those tough Nintendo moments, you know, when you're about ready to hurl your controller at the telly. They're plugging the Nintendo hotline, saying it's there to help with your stress from tricky games. Yee. There's a bit about how quiet the hotline has been recently, apparently because everyone in the office has been glued to Mario Kart 64 multiplayer. Seems like they're having a right laugh playing it, which is fair enough, it was a good laugh back then, wasn't it? They mention Killer Instinct and Killer Instinct Gold too, saying they're still playing those. Reckon the N64 version of Killer Instinct is pretty much the same speed as the SNES one, which is good to know if you were into that sort of thing. Then there's a section explaining what the Nintendo hotline actually is. Apparently it's a team of expert gamers ready to help you out, open 7 days a week. They reckon they get thousands of calls a day, answering questions on all sorts of Nintendo stuff. And they've even got more staff now to handle it all. You can ring them up on 017-036-52222. It's not a free number, mind, but they say they can help with passwords, cheats, and general advice. They are open Monday to Friday, midday to 8 p.m., and weekends 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. Moving on, there's a Mario Kart 64 section with common questions and cheats. Someone's asking who the best racer is, and they say it depends on your skill, but beginners should use Mario or Luigi, and more advanced players should try Toad, Yoshi or Wario. Princess is meant to be good if you're all about speed. There's a question about first-person view in replays, but apparently you can't do that. Another one is about the characters on the title screen facing the wrong way and having different colors, but they just say it's because the game has got the extra tracks on it. Someone's wondering if they should beat 150cc to get the extra option, and they reckon you should beat 50 and 100cc first, but it's a good idea to try. Finally, someone asks if two players can be the same racer, and the answer is no, sadly. In the cheats and codes bit, they talk about reverse tracks, saying you can get mirrored tracks if you finish first in all the 150cc cups. The title screen changes, and the characters face the other way apparently, a bit of a novelty. Then there's course ghosts, on Mario Raceway, Luigi Raceway, and Royal Circuit. They've listed target times to beat: 1 minute 46 seconds on Mario Raceway, 2 minutes 12 seconds on Luigi Raceway, and 3 minutes 10 seconds on Royal Circuit. They reckon power sliding is essential to get those times, and they explain how to do it. You hold R when going into a corner, steer into the bend, then quickly steer the other way, and if you do it right, smoke comes out, turns red, and you get a speed boost. Classic Mario Kart stuff, really. This page from an old N64 mag, back when they were handing out tips hot off the press. It's all about Killer Instinct Gold, remember that one? Proper button basher that was. Looks like they've got a hotline number there, bet that was ringing off the hook back in '97. Anyway, this Killer Instinct Gold section, they're calling it Hotline Hints and Tips. Right then, so they've got some cheat codes here. One to play as Gargos, the big bad boss, ugly fella, ain't he? Then there's one for special colors, fancy colors for your characters, probably just gold, white and shadow if I'm reading this right. See end credits. Well, that's useful if you can't be asked to finish the game properly. Enable all options, unlocks everything, no surprise there. Arena/music select, that's a decent one if you want to pick your stage music, always a bit of alright to have your own tunes on. Sky stage sounds a bit like the rooftop level, yeah, the one where you can boot people off the edge, bit cheap that. And finally random select, for when you can't make your mind up who to play as, BR. Then there's a section on moves for Gargos. Dash, uppercut, fireball, all the usual fighting game stuff. They've even got combos listed. Combo breaker, openers, pressure, all that jargon. Sample combos, yeah right, like you could pull those off consistently in the heat of the moment. Good luck with that. Warrant. So yeah, just a standard tips page really, for Killer Instinct Gold. Probably helped a few kids back in the day when they were stuck on a boss, or just wanted to mess around with cheat codes. Ah, simpler times, eh? This page of N64 Magazine is all about getting you ahead in your games. Typical tips section really. They're running a new high score competition for Mario Kart 64 on Luigi Raceway, wanting your fastest lap times. Seems like a bit of fun. And the prize is one of those fancy SharkPad Pro 64 controllers, remember those? Yeah. Then there's a bunch of cheats for Shadows of the Empire, that Star Wars game. Apparently if you enter your name just right you can play as different characters like a Wampa or a Stormtrooper, bit daft really. They even point out they can't operate switches or climb stairs, some secret weapon. They've got instructions for getting to control an ATST walker as well, which is always a laugh, stomping around in one of those tin cans. Finally, they're still banging on about Super Mario 64, can you believe it? Even back then they were saying it was the best game ever, bit much isn't it? But they do have a tip about the baby penguin in Cool Cool Mountain, saying it mimics your dives. Never actually tried that myself. And then they mentioned some ice shoot thing in Course 4 if you do the penguin race again later in the game. And something about if you get all 120 stars, Mario gets a bit chubby for the slide. Sounds like typical Nintendo silliness. There are a few pictures scattered about showing the games in action, Mario Kart, Star Wars and Mario 64, just to jog your memory. This page is a right blast from the past, innit? It's a page from N64 Magazine, must be back in '97 judging by the games. It's the Reader's Top 10 Tips section, always a good read to see what cheeky shortcuts and cheats people had found. Right at the top they're on about getting a 0 feet 000 time in Super Mario 64's quick race, clever clogs. Then there's something about Star Fox 64 being cunning in 4-player mode to sneak up on your mates, probably good for a laugh down the student halls. Then we get into the proper tips. Number 1 is Mario Kart 64 on DK's Jungle Parkway. Some geezer called Mark Wilkinson found a shortcut across the rope bridge. Always good to shave off a few seconds. Tip number 2 is more Super Mario 64, a trick to finish in 0 feet 000 on Koopa the Quick, bit fiddly it sounds, with seesaws and backwards somersaults. Stephen Farrelly in Dublin sent that one in. Warren 2. Star Fox 64 gets another mention. Tip 3, for sneaking about in 4-player as I mentioned. Then FIFA 64, if you want to batter the computer, there's a way to score loads of own goals and then switch teams at the last minute. Cheeky, you'll guess it. Mortal Kombat Trilogy gets a shout in Tip 5, with a babality cheat, holding both punches and kicks to go full size again, sent in by Ugo Unosu from Liverpool. Number 6 is back to Super Mario 64 for getting under 31 seconds in the first race with Koopa, another speedrun trick using dive bombs and somersaults. Turok tip at number 7, about saving your ammo in the bonus levels by pausing and reloading a saved game. Matthew Howell in Port Talbot thought of that one. ISS 64 tip number 8 is for creating players. If the stats are rubbish, just keep saying no to registering, and then yes, apparently it changes them. Daniel Glenfield from Abingdon sent that in. Warren Citadel. More Mario Kart 64 at tip 9, in battle mode on Skyscraper, driving into the pits to make your opponent lose their last balloon. Apparently clouds of smoke come out. Funny but useless according to V. Kretka from Amsterdam. Korea. And finally, tip 10 is a bit of a joke, about holidays, saying if you're like James you should book your holiday near an erupting volcano. Classic British sarcasm there. Below all that, there's a form to send in your own top tips, with spaces for your game name, tip, your name and address, to send into the magazine at Monmouth Street, Bath. They're even offering a flash N64 pin badge if you get in, and something bit special for number 1 slot. Tempting in it? Good times. This page from N64 Magazine, likely the letters page, Club 64, kicks off with a bloke looking like he's just been bombarded by fan mail, chewing on envelopes no less. They're asking the big questions, the ones that were probably doing the rounds in the playground at the time. You know, is the N64 any good? Is Turok a bit pants? And why does Mario have, quote, lumpy gloves? Deep stuff. Daily. There are a few letters here. First up, Robbie from Edinburgh seems to be properly chuffed with his import Hong Kong N64. Says he's had all the consoles and a fancy PC, but the N64 blew him away. He bangs on about Pilot Wing 64 and Super Mario 64, saying they're the real deal. Proper smooth graphics, none of that blocky pixelated nonsense you got on older machines. He's clearly excited for what's to come, bless him. Then we have Jay Merry from Stroud, bit of a brown noser this one, gushing about how amazing the magazine is, every word, every picture, the class and charisma apparently. He's even impressed with the smell of the magazine. Bit much if you ask me, but each to their own. He's just after issue 1 he missed, typical. Next, Gisela from Portugal is in a right panic about Zelda 64. Apparently some French magazine has said it won't be coming to Europe. Crikey, remember those rumors back then? He's threatening to unleash cold-hearted Japanese dogs if he doesn't get Zelda. Bit strong, mate. Ed, the editor, calms him down, says the French are wrong and Zelda will get here eventually, just a bit later than Japan and America. He even likes Gisela's Zelda comic strip idea, which is a bit random. Finally, Sanjay from somewhere emailing in moaning about the Mario Kart 64 review, seems a bit confused about whether it was the PAL or Japanese version they reviewed, and mentions something about crap PAL conversion. Right old techhead. Ed clears it up, saying the review was based on the UK version, which is still great despite the PAL conversion. Apparently they had to use Japanese version screenshots, because the UK version went funny on their dodgy PC screenshot setup. Clear as mud, eh? Still, Mario Kart 64, what a game, PAL or not. This page from N64 Magazine is the letters and "So Tell Me This" section, where readers get to ask their burning questions. First up, we've got a bloke moaning about Mario Kart 64 being too easy. Says he finished all the cups in 5 hours flat, even the mirror mode. He reckons the old SNES version was tougher. Mind you, he does say Yoshi's track is alright, but the rest are a bit pants. Another reader is writing in to say the mag is late, but he's still looking forward to reading it, bless him. And then there's poor soul, who feels a bit queasy playing Turok. Says it's like Doom and Quake, makes him feel unwell. Mario 64 on the other hand he's loving. Borintubi. Over on the "So Tell Me This" side, there are questions about dodgy RGB SCART leads, and whether you can get a good picture on import machines. Apparently Fire are the people to ask about that. Someone's wondering when Rev Limit Multi-Racing Top Gear Rally and Lamborghini 64 are coming out. Sounds like a racing fan. There's talk of FMV, full motion video, on the N64. Apparently Gamertek's Jeopardy game will be the first to use it. Not sure how exciting that is really. A reader wants more Japanese games with English translations, which is fair enough, but the mag says not many people are actually buying them, so probably won't be a regular thing. Someone's asking about tennis games after watching Wimbledon. Apparently there's a few in development. Then there's a really odd question about those white bits on Mario's gloves. Seems apparently. There's a question about playing a US N64 in the UK and the 50/60ths of a hertz difference. Then about whether unplugging a controller Marios can damage it. Apparently probably best not to do that. Someone's asking about anime-style games, and the mag says Unreal's meant to be a bit like that. And RPG fans want to know if there's anything like Zelda or Mother 3 coming. They mention Holy Magic Century as one possibility. Purinton Norcus. Finally, there's a question about why game sizes are always 64M, 96M, or 128M. Apparently it's something to do with binary and powers of 2. A bit techie for me that. And lastly, someone called Chris Easton wants to know why Will from the mag hates him so much. Bit of office politics there perhaps. Seems like a mixed bag of questions and moans this month. Typical letters page really. This page of N64 Magazine looks like it's the letters and high score section, always a good read back in the day. Starting off we have a few letters. Someone called Chris and Porker are asking about a cheat in Mario Kart 64 on Royal Raceway. Sounds like they accidentally sped the game up to 500 CB. Wow, those were the days trying to find all the glitches and secrets. Ed the editor reckons it's a feature. Says 1 in 5 races speeds up. Hilarious consequences he says. Probably right. Then there's Derek from Coventry moaning about his memory packs wiping data on Wave Race and Pilot Wings. Common problem, those third-party memory packs, always a bit dodgy. He's also had his initials changed on Wave Race time trials. Sounds like a dodgy EEPROM in the cartridge. Ed suggests calling Nintendo for a replacement if it's irritating him too much. Colt John via email is having a pop at a rival mag called 64 Magazine, accusing them of copying N64 Magazine's new gadgets section and directory. Blatantly copied, he says. Price tag is rubbish too. Ed just says, nice paper though. Bit sarcastic there, Ed. Below that we have the "I'm the best" section. Always wanted to get my name in there. It's a competition to submit your best times for games. Top 5 get printed, and a special N64 pin badge if you're good enough. This month's star performer is Andrew Rutherford from Macclesfield for his Star Fox 64 score. Good effort, Andrew. They want photo evidence for scores. No videos though, too much hassle to sort through apparently. GK. Then there's the high score charts themselves. We've got Super Mario 64, American and Japanese version, Foot Race with Cooper the Quick and Peach slide listed. Lots of names there: Ryan Cowell, Andrew Watson, Sharon Harron, David DeCina, Andrew Mills, Stephen Adams, Neil Faulkner, Jez French, John Young and Oliver Edwards, all featuring times ranging from 19 seconds to 22 seconds on Cooper the Quick, and 13 seconds to 18 seconds on Peach slide. Next chart is for Mario Kart, again American and Japanese, for Luigi Circuit and Mario Circuit. Loads more names: Ryan Cowell again, Paul Crampton, Andrew Walton, Neil Quant, Kevin Sheck, Graham Dibley, Simon Franklin, Roger Vance and Andrew Rutherford are amongst those on the leaderboards. Times are around the 58 seconds to 1 minute 6 seconds mark. Geek. Then Wave Race American and Japanese version again, Sunny Beach and Wave Race for the courses. More names: Paul Knight, Carl Waters, John Hatch, Chris Murphy, Lee Hammond, Frankie Mayers, Andrew Mills again. Times are around 1 minute 5 seconds to 1 minute 6 seconds for Sunny Beach, and 1 minute 18 seconds to 1 minute 20 seconds for Wave Race. Finally Star Fox, any version, Level 1 Corneria, and Stunt Mode Dolphin Park. Roger Vance, Andrew Rutherford, Ian Gollins, Andrew Hurst and Edward Goulby are in the Star Fox charts. Scores are around the 200 to 21,000 mark. Looks like they want more PAL Mario Kart times next month, and to send in photos, not videos, if you reckon you're the best. Good luck to anyone trying. This page is the letters page, always a good bit of a read to see what folks were moaning about back in the day. Kicking off, we've got someone called That Bloke getting all defensive about the N64, bless him. Seems someone had the cheek to suggest the anti-aliasing wasn't perfect and dared to criticize KI Gold. He's having none of it, banging on about how much better the N64 is than the PlayStation, going on about Formula 1 and Ridge Racer looking glitchy. He does admit the PlayStation's alright, just not as good as his beloved N64. He reckons Tekken is better than KI Gold, which is a fair cop if you ask me. Then there's the bonus letters section. Always a bit of fluff here. One bloke sent in a popcorn kernel he thought looked like a piranha plant head, which sounds a bit desperate for attention if you ask me. The editor, Ed, dryly remarks it looks more like coffee granules now. Someone else is asking about Total Magazine and Tim Weaver, showing their age a bit there. The main chunk is called Dream On, and it's all reader ideas for games. One fella, Jeremy, wants an arcade machine powered by an N64. Bit bonkers, but I guess novel. Then we've got Bike Trek, 64 inches, which is basically a downhill mountain biking game. Sounds alright actually. A bit like them mountain racer bikes games you saw around. Super Cool Mario is a weird one. Mario in jeans and a t-shirt, set in a village. Sounds a bit wrong, doesn't it, KKK? Postman Pat 64 inches is just plain odd. Postman Pat's game but with Mario-style levels, and Jess the cat thrown in. What were they smoking? Mario Kung Fu is another head-scratcher, a Mario beat-em-up where you get belts, like in karate, reaching black belt after beating Koopa. Righto. Finally, TV Executive God is some kind of soap opera sim, where you control a soap like EastEnders. Apparently the Spectrum EastEnders game was awful, so maybe best avoided. The editor, Ed, says they are all top-notch ideas, being polite as always. There's a call for more ideas and an address to send them to if you fancy getting a badge. Rounding it off, someone is praising the competitions, saying the prizes are good and the questions are actually hard, unlike the usual rubbish competitions you get. And a final letter correcting someone's hearing. Apparently Mario isn't saying gay Bowser but so longer Bowser, in a dodgy Italian accent. And someone else thinks Ryu from Akira looks like Jin Kazuma in a Mahjong 64 screenshot. Bit random that last one. All in all, typical letters page stuff, a mix of sensible and utterly barking mad ideas. Always good for a laugh. This page from N64 Magazine, right, the Europhiles, taking a look at the European side of Nintendo game development. It starts off by mentioning games like Donkey Kong Country, Blast Corps, Star Fox and Killer Instinct, saying it might surprise you how many Nintendo games actually came from Blighty and France back then. They're going to check out these European developers who are, and I quote, out-Japanesing the Japanese, to see what they're up to. The article kicks off by acknowledging we Brits and Europeans were always grateful for Nintendo and the SNES, and now the N64 of course, but it wasn't quite the same love back, was it? Being stuck with pale TV, letterbox screens and slower games, and waiting ages for the good games to arrive after the rest of the world had them, was a bit of a pain. They say despite all that, we kept coming back for more, because the systems and games, like Mario, were just so good you couldn't resist. But it also points out that Nintendo being a bit distant with Europe, actually pushed European developers to get creative with the SNES, coming up with all sorts of clever tricks and tech. And now apparently Europe was set to be a big deal for the N64 too, name-dropping studios like Rare, DMA Design and Argonaut as leading the charge. They reckon if anyone's gonna reach the heights of Shigeru Miyamoto, it'll be these guys. Ta! There are a few little pictures around the page. You've got Donkey Kong, what looks like a racing game screenshot, and Conker the Squirrel hiding down at the bottom, bless him. All in all, it's a bit of a pat on the back for the European game scene, and a look ahead to what they were bringing to the N64, even if we did have to put up with a bit of a raw deal compared to the lucky Yanks and Japanese. This page is having a look at Nintendo in Europe. It's called The Story So Far. Seems like it wasn't always that simple for them setting up shop over here. Back in the 80s, the Japanese giant, Nintendo, was already massive in Japan and America. But Europe was a bit of a different beast. Apparently they messed around with Mattel for a bit, and then some fella named Ron Judy took over with Nintendo International. Sounds a bit dodgy to be honest. Anyway, they managed to flog a load of NES consoles, even if the SNES, or SNES as some people call it, was a bit late getting here compared to America. Interestingly, because Nintendo sort of left European developers to their own devices with the NES and SNES, it sparked a load of creativity. They mentioned blokes like Rare and Software Creations, even DMA Design who did Uniracers, who were proper inventive, even reverse engineering stuff. Games like Star Fox and Uniracers are mentioned as examples of what the Europeans could do. Now it sounds like Nintendo has realized that these European developers are actually pretty good, and they are trying to work with them more for the N64. They're going on about Rare and Software Creations again, and their upcoming games like Banjo-Kazooie. Apparently they think European games are finally going to be as good as the stuff coming out of Japan and America. We'll see if that's actually true, won't we? This page is from an old N64 mag, back when we were all buzzing about what was coming out on the machine. It's having a look at European developers, which is quite interesting really. First up there's Software Creations, a British studio, and apparently they've been knocking about for ages, even back to the NES days, reverse engineering it to show Nintendo that's dedication. They made Equinox, Solstice, and Plock, which were decent SNES games, proper old-school platformers and puzzle games. They are working on Hexen for the N64, which was already out on PC, a Doom-style game but fantasy, and they're also teasing another game called Creator, which sounds intriguing, and Blade and Barrel, which is a bit of a daft name but they say it's been revamped. They seem to be keeping their cards close to their chest about what Creator is exactly, saying we'll have to wait until the Shoshinkai show in November to see it, which is a bit of a tease. Typical magazine stuff, build the hype. Do. Then there's Gremlin Interactive, remember them? Proper old-school PC game developers, Spectrum and Commodore 64 days, right through to PC and now consoles. They've bought DMA Design, who were massive at the time, they did Lemmings and all that, so that's a big deal. They are bringing Actua Soccer to the N64, which makes sense as that was their big franchise, and they reckon we might see Actua Golf, Actua Tennis and even Actua Ice Hockey on the N64 too. Whether Actua Soccer can compete with ISS 64, Konami's football game, is another question though. ISS was pretty special. They're hinting at some DMA Design stuff coming maybe towards the end of next year, which would be amazing if it's anything like Lemmings in 3D, imagine that. So yeah, interesting little look at some of the British studios and what they were up to on the N64 back then, a reminder of simpler times for gaming really. This page delves into what various developers are up to for the N64, back in the day when we were all waiting to see what games were coming. Acclaim, or rather their UK studios Probe and Iguana, are mentioned first. Probe is working on 3 N64 games, one being Extreme G, which they're comparing to Wipeout. Remember that PlayStation game? Futuristic racing, eh? They're also doing a football game, codenamed Ultra Soccer, and apparently a conversion of Forsaken, which was a PC game. Iguana also has a couple of N64 titles in the works, but they're keeping shitem about those for now. Cheshire? Virgin Interactive? Well, their N64 plans seem a bit shaky. Freak Boy is the only game mentioned, and even that's uncertain. The reviewer seems to think they might not be one to watch on the N64, which is a bit harsh, innit? Microprose are mentioned, who did that Top Gun game back in the day. Apparently their N64 interpretation of it was deemed too ambitious and binned. Shame, maybe. Argonaut are up next, remember them from the Super FX chip days on the SNES? They were supposed to be doing Star Fox 2, but that got canned, didn't it? Anyway, they're back working with Nintendo, and have 2 N64 games on the go. One should be out early next year, and another later in '98. They're talking about getting news around summertime, maybe at the Japanese Shoshinkai show. .bmg are apparently doing 1 N64 game at the moment, Silicon Valley. More titles are expected from UK and global developers soon for the N64 apparently. Guti. Finally, Psygnosis and Traveller's Tales. Psygnosis, known for being a Sony developer, apparently might still do N64 games. Traveller's Tales, who did a lot of SNES games for Psygnosis, will be focusing on PC and PlayStation for now though. The reviewer is a bit sarcastic about them potentially not wanting to bother with expensive cartridges again, and suggests it's boo-hiss for now, like they're fading away from Nintendo. Bit dramatic, eh? Gary. There are a few screenshots dotted about, Extreme G, Forsaken, and another of Forsaken just to give you a visual I suppose. All in all, just a bit of a check-in to see who's doing what for the N64. This page is diving into the world of European N64 developers, and kicking off with Eidos, who were already making waves back then thanks to Tomb Raider. They reckon Eidos are expanding rapidly but surprisingly not building their own dev teams, instead publishing titles from other studios. They mentioned Tomb Raider 2, which at the time was a PC game, but clearly a big deal with Lara Croft becoming a household name, and they are saying Eidos are trying to move beyond just that type of game. Then we've got Titus, a French developer who apparently made a name for themselves on the NES and SNES, with games like the Blues Brothers. Goodness knows how many copies they shifted back then. Apparently their first N64 game is Lamborghini 64, which is an update of an older SNES racer. They've been working on it for ages, even before the N64 was properly out, aiming for a 90% completion status, and apparently spent a year just on the car physics. Sounds like they're taking it seriously. They're also working on a Superman game for the N64, which is interesting as superhero games weren't always great back then, but they mention wanting it to be a proper superhero experience, not just a platformer. And lastly, they've got Quest for Camelot, based on the Warner Bros. Animated film, a Zelda-style game, apparently. Eric from Titus seems pretty upbeat about the N64, calling it the best platform, and reckons their strategy for gameplay will win the war for Nintendo. Bit strong, but you had to be confident back then in this industry, I suppose. There are screenshots of Tomb Raider 2, Superman looking a bit blocky bless him, and Lamborghini 64 showing off some polygonal car action. All looks very of its time, very 90s polygons as you'd expect. This page is an article looking at Rare, those British game developers, and it delves into their history a bit. Apparently a lot of younger gamers only know them for Killer Instinct, but they've been around for yonks. They started out way back in the Xi Spectrum days, doing games like Flest, Jetpack, Trans Am and Cookie, for Ultimate Play the Game, which was their original name apparently. Then they did Sabre Wolf, Lunar Jetman and Nightlaw, proper legendary stuff, in ZX Spectrum circles. The article mentions they tried to crack the Commodore 64 market but didn't quite manage it, but then in '94 they rebranded as Rare Limited, and got in bed with Nintendo. They did a load of NES games, some good like Battletoads, some not so much. Apparently Wheel of Fortune was a bit naff. Donkey Kong Country on the SNES was what really made them big though, with all that fancy ACM graphics. The article calls it advanced computer modeling, made it a must-have game. Nintendo even bought a quarter of the company in '96, big investment at the time. They reckon Rare have already proven themselves with Blastcore, and there's high hopes for GoldenEye 007 to be better than your average movie tie-in game, mentioning the Doom-style first-person shooting and the ability to shoot enemies in different parts of their body, and secret Bond villain sections. Sounds a bit cheeky there. They say it's nearly finished and due out soon. Then there's talk about a new Kong-based game, but the focus for now is on Banjo-Kazooie, which was apparently called Dream before. This Banjo game is supposed to be the one that made Howard Lincoln from Nintendo say it's a new standard in graphics technology for home consoles. A big leap for the N64 apparently. They reckon Banjo-Kazooie looks even more intricate than Super Mario 64, which is a bold claim. If they put as much imagination into the game design as the graphics, it could be something special. They also mention Conker's Quest, another 3D platform game from Rare, saying it's designed for younger players but technically advanced like Banjo-Kazooie, but it's in early stages and not out until next year. And then apparently, after Conker's Quest, a new Jetman game campaign will start. Gita? There are screenshots dotted around the page. There's one for GoldenEye 007 showing the first-person view, another one of Banjo-Kazooie, what looks like Conker's Quest, and a screenshot from Killer Instinct Gold. And a little one from Blastcore. So yeah, a bit of a Rare lovin', and why not, they were doing some good stuff at the time. This page gives us a look at some of the European developers trying to make a splash on the N64. Jin. First up is Ubisoft, or Ubisoft as they're known now I suppose. They were already knocking around on the SNES with Rayman and that Mario Kart rip-off Street Racer, weren't they? Seems their first N64 game is called Tonic Trouble. Looks a bit like a cartoon platformer, nothing too groundbreaking visually from that screenshot, but they say it's got a comic book feel. Key E. Then there's Ocean, remember them? Old school they are. From the home computer days. Apparently they've merged with Infogrames. Infogrames, they did the Smurfs game, on the SNES, right? Anyway, Ocean's bringing Mission Impossible to the N64, which could be alright, and something called Space Circus, which they're billing as a Zelda meets Mario kind of game. Intriguing I guess, the screenshot looks a bit odd, a sort of pointy-nosed fella. They're also teasing a cowboy game, because why not? And maybe even working with some Japanese developers, which could mean even more games heading our way, maybe. Finally there's Interplay and VIS Interactive, talking about Earthworm Jim 3D. Earthworm Jim in 3D, blimey. They've even got the original creators, David Perry and Doug Tenapel, involved as consultants. They're really pushing this cartoon look, stretching and squashing the characters, with thick black lines, proper cartoon style they reckon. Looking at the screenshots, it's certainly colourful. They're talking about taking advantage of the analog stick, which is fair enough, and how it's a proper AAA title, not just a quick port job. They seem pretty keen on working more with Nintendo if it does well. Well, we'll see about that, won't we? This page is about DMA Design, who were the folks who made Lemmings back in the day, and now they're beavering away on a couple of interesting sounding games for the N64. Apparently, after Lemmings they decided to ditch Psygnosis and focus on being a bit more original, rather than just churning out more green suicidal guys. First up is Body Harvest. Now this has been in the works for a while. Seems like Nintendo keeps changing their minds about what sort of game they want it to be. It started as a straight shooter, but now they're pushing it more towards being a role-playing game, adding in character interaction and redoing the levels. They've got all the monsters and vehicles sorted. It sounds like they are just tweaking the gameplay to be a bit more strategic. Then there's Silicon Valley, which sounds properly bonkers. It's like a cartoon, but with robots. You're a computer chip exploring this space station, Silicon Valley, which has got everything from deserts to Arctic bits. The story's a bit of a head-scratcher, something about it disappearing and reappearing. The real twist is you can control different robotic animals, right? From mice with wheels instead of legs, to other creatures. Apparently there are about 40 different species kicking about in different areas. It sounds like there's a food chain thing going on, and you'll need to fight or leg it depending on what animal you're controlling. The reviewer reckons it could be a bit special, with its mix of action and exploring. Looking at the next month bit, it's all the usual suspects, isn't it? Star Fox, Super Mario, Pilot Wings and Mario Kart. They are asking what makes Nintendo's classic games so enduring. Well, we already know the answer to that, don't we? They're just solid games, and we keep buying them. This page of the N64 magazine is teasing what's coming up next month. Issue 6, it says up top. Seems they've reviewed some games, whatever they might be. They're not being too specific, eh? There's a big shouty bit saying, "We demand N64 RPGs." Bit dramatic. Even for back then. They mentioned Zelda 64. Obviously everyone was waiting for that. And Holy Magic Century and Mother 3. Which were all supposed to be RPGs or something similar. They're wondering about Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest II. Dream on, lads. Everyone was hoping for those on the 64, but it never really happened, did it? They've got a how-to guide on how to completely ruin Blast Corps, charming, and another one for Pilot Wings 64 about ruling the skies. Must be some tips and tricks in there. Rundoris. Then there's something about Mario Kart Championship Stage 2, so they were running competitions in the mag. Must have been a laugh. Rundori. Looking at the index on the side, it's all the usual stuff. Previews and reviews of games, bits and bobs. Let's see. Rundori. Blast Corps review, Body Harvest preview, Banjo-Kazooie future look, Bomberman 64 preview, Buggy Boogie preview, never heard of that one. Conker's Quest preview, Dark Rift review, Dream On, Duke Nukem 64 preview, Dual Heroes preview, Extreme G future look, F-Zero 64 future look, GoldenEye 007 future look, Go Troublemakers review. Oh wait, no, go! Just Troublemakers review. Fair enough. Hexen review. Killer Instinct Gold tips. Lamborghini 64 preview. Mario Kart 64 bits. Mission. Impossible preview. Mother 3 preview. Multi-Racing Championship review. Shadows of the Empire review. Silicon Valley preview. Space Circus preview. Star Fox 64 news. Super Mario 64 tip. Superman preview. Tonic Trouble preview. Top Gear Rally preview. WCW vs NWO preview. Yoshi's Island 64 preview, Zelda 64 preview. Blimey, that's a lot of previews. Looks like a packed issue next time. GoldenEye, Zelda, Mario Kart, Shadows of the Empire, all the big hitters that everyone was buzzing about at the time. Good times, good times. This page you've got the cover for N64 magazine from August 1997, issue number 5 it looks like. Big and bold headline screaming, "Keep road rage off the streets." Cheeky considering it's all about Mario Kart 64. You've got Princess Peach looking a bit worried with Wario grinning like a Cheshire cat, both in their carts, classic stuff. Down the side there's the reviews this issue bit. Looks like they're having a gander at Blast Corps, that rare game where you smash buildings, and Multi-Racing Championship, remember that one? Bit of a blur of polygons if I recall. Hexen is in there too, bit of a Doom clone really, but hey, more shooters on the N64. Can't complain. Oh, and Go Troublemakers, that weird platformer with the monkey. Cousin. Hang on, scratch that, they just called it Troublemakers. Shadows of the Empire, the Japanese version, interesting. And Star Fox 64, obviously that was massive at the time. And Dark Rift, must have been some fighting game. Then there's the other great stuff section. Pages of new games from the E3 show, always good to see what's coming up. Mario Kart 64 Championship, bet that was a laugh to read about. Why European games are so good? Bit of national pride there, eh? How to be the best at Mario Kart 64? Well, everyone wanted to know that. Behind the scenes at E3, more industry gossip. Plug this in results, probably some peripheral reviews. How to get a perfect high score on Mario 64 Part 2. Part 2, eh? They really milking that Mario Kart 64 hype. Latest news from Japan, always a bit cryptic those bits. Club 64, probably reader letters and stuff. Loads of tips, always handy. And every N64 game rated, bet that was a long list. Yeah, typical N64 magazine cover really, lots packed in. trying to get you excited for the latest games. Takes you back, doesn't it?